Happy New Year. Welcome to the Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC Fight Night 217, Imavov versus Gastelum, also known as UFC Vegas 67. I'm pretty sure it's 67. It's been a couple weeks since I had to increment that little counter. Anyway, I'm your host, Ben Duffy of Sherdog.com. With me, back again after hopefully relaxing vacation, is Keith Schillen, the executive producer of the Sherdog Radio Network. Keith, how are you doing?
I'm great, man. Happy New Year to you and all the listeners. Let's get right back in this. Let's start off the card right. Loaded, absolute loaded card starting it off.
The card is loaded. It's loaded with some things. It's loaded like a diaper. I'm telling you, man, we joke, and we have joked for the years that we've been doing this about fight nights in particular, and fight night undercards, especially in particular, being basically Dana White's Saturday Night Contender Series, where people who win on the Contender Series, or sometimes who even lose, get signed, and they basically have to fight other Contender Series veterans until they get out of that first deal, and either they're cut or they move up to fighting on quote unquote real UFC cards. This is absolutely that. I mean, this 6-fight undercard, I think it has 6 people debuting from the Contender Series. It's got a bunch of undefeated fighters on it, but they're undefeated against bad competition. I mean, we'll get to Nick Fiore in a minute. We'll get there.
Yeah.
It's something else. I mean, this card, I almost feel bad asking you to give a letter grade for this card because it did lose what was legitimately a sensational fight in Jeff Neal versus Shavkat Rakhmonov.
Best fight of the card.
Yeah, it was best fight on.
At least the one that you like moving forward after that is the one you'd be most excited about. Either Rakhmonov is I think he's already proven he's the real deal, but he would add another huge victory. Or if Jeff Neal is the guy that had a lot of buzz a couple of years ago, he'd be right back on it. Losing that, I mean, the main event, you can get excited about one side. The other guy, Gastelum, has been around for a long time. Like this, I give it a C-. I'm a little more excited because we haven't had a card in a long time. The Bellator Rising card was good, but it wasn't the most exciting card on paper. That the fights weren't that exciting. Yeah. So we kind of, hoping we can start off the year with a pretty good card. Hopefully some good fights. I think there's some pretty good prospects. So I'll give it like a C-.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you there, C-. And like you say, part of it is that when you're hungry, any restaurant you drive by smells great, because if this same card was sandwiched like right after a monster blockbuster card, or it was like the 7th of 7 card, weekends in a row of UFC, we'd be like, D, why are we even? So C-.
It's like the guy who's walking through the desert for like 3 weeks. He finds water and it's like toilet bowl water. He's just happy. He's not saying like, hey, I need some Poland Springs or Aquafina or something like that. He just.
You heard it here. UFC Fight Night 217, toilet bowl water. Like Keith Schillen has dubbed this card. I mean, Javid Basharat is a sizzling prospect who, I mean, we'll talk about it when we get there, but he's one of those guys where if he keeps winning, stardom's going to come with it.
One thing a lot of guys, sorry to interrupt you there, a lot of guys will do like these, a lot of websites and YouTubers and stuff. They'll kind of give, they're like, hey, here's a list of 10 guys going to make a big jump in 2023 or something like that. Everyone kind of has the same ideas. Like he's going to be probably on 85% of those lists.
Absolutely. Yeah, he very much so. And I mean, it's got Umar Nurmagomedov, who now that Shavkat Rakhmonov is off the card, if you ask me, okay, if anybody from this card fights for a UFC title within the next 2 or 3 years, who is it most likely to be? I'm saying it's Umar Nurmagomedov.
It's not Kelvin Gastelum, even though his like Twitter account is something like on a mission for gold or something like that. Like, if you're on a mission for gold, you better grab like the metal detector and hit the beach, brother.
Unless he means LFA gold.
Finding some lady's bracelet is your best chance over at the beaches out there in California.
All right. Well, I think that's probably enough dunking on the card in general. If you want, we can jump right in and start dunking on individual fights.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. First up on the UFC Fight Night 217 prelims is a women's flyweight matchup between Priscila Cachoeira and Sijara Eubanks. Cachoeira The 34-year-old Brazilian is 12-4 overall. She is 4-4 since joining the UFC, originally as a sacrificial lamb for Valentina Shevchenko's flyweight debut. She stuck on roster despite losing her first 3 and has won 4 of 5, including a first-round knockout of Ariane Lipski at UFC on ESPN, Vera versus Cruz last August. That took place at bantamweight. They had been scheduled to fight like a week or two before. It got pushed back, and so the flyweight matchup became a bantamweight matchup. But, I mean, nonetheless, it was a flyweight beating a flyweight. So that's 2 fights in a row that she has won, and she comes into this fight against Eubanks, whose momentum is kind of headed the opposite direction. The 37-year-old New Jersey native is an even 7-7 in her mixed martial arts career. She is an even 5-5 in the UFC since joining as the would-be finalist of the 26th season of The Ultimate Fighter. She, of course, missed out on fighting for that tough title and the inaugural women's flyweight championship because she basically had health issues related to a failed weight cut. And that has sort of laid out the groundwork for Eubanks's UFC run. She's 5-5 in the UFC, but she's 2-2 at flyweight. And I put flyweight in quotes because she is 2-2 against flyweights, and she's also 2-2 at actually making the flyweight limit. She's missed weight twice, and that doesn't even count, again, the tough finale. Most recently, she got finished in the 3rd round by Melissa Gatto. That was all the way back a little over a year ago at UFC Fight Night, Lewis versus Dawkins in December of 2021. That capped a 1-3 run for her, followed up by an entire year off. So she's coming back a year off, not great run in the division, and trying to make flyweight again. I wish I could say what the odds were, but there are actually no odds available as of Wednesday night when we're recording this. I'm not sure what they would be, but I suspect that Cachoeira is going to open as the favorite, just as someone with positive momentum, and that has been more active recently. But Sherdog associate editor Jay Petrie asked me a question about this fight that I'm going to pass on to you.
Okay.
Is this the lowest level fight in UFC history with top 15 implications?
Oh, gosh.
Like, if Priscila Cachoeira wins, she's won 5 of 6. And, I mean, she's beaten.
No, I'd go with Danielle Wolf's the last fight. like that's top 15. Or,
I guess any women's featherweight fight would.
It's got to be up there. I wouldn't say it's. You have like the old heavyweight. I mean, is he talking about the world or in the UFC?
In the UFC, like,
because I think about the. I mean, I know the reason why I say that. I go back to like the heavyweight Andre Arlovski beating Justin Eilers, like those days.
Yeah,
like where. There was Mike Kyle was like seen as a future title challenger. I mean, then Wes Sims was a top challenger, and Gian McGee. Like that would have been pretty bad. But in like the more modern, again, I'm not that. I don't have the.
Yeah, I mean, he was just asking as like
that Jay has, and Jay's on top. Like Jay's a genius when it comes to that. So I don't know off the top. I mean, I go straight off memory. He goes off statistics. It's up there. Can you imagine like UFC, you get in the room together, you're like, guys, 2023, this is going to be a big year for us, biggest year, 30th anniversary, ESPN, let's go huge. Let's start off the year right. Yeah, start with Sijara Eubanks. What the fuck?
Let's start with Sijara Eubanks coming back after a year off at age 37 and trying to make flyweight, where she is literally a less than 50-50 proposition to get it done.
Oh, this is that flyweight. Yeah.
Like it's bad. Like I have to imagine that this is just Mick Maynard going, if I squeeze this fight far enough down the card, can I squeeze it so far that it just doesn't even happen in the UFC? I imagine like there's a sports fan out there somewhere who's like, yeah, I just want a New Year's resolution. I really want to get into more sports. Maybe I'll do MMA. Like that's really popular. I really got into it. I'll start watching UFCs, and the first fight you've used Sijara freaking Eubanks. It's like being at like a New Year's Eve party and like, 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year. And everyone's kissing people, and you're looking around, and like, it's like the only other person is like your cousin. You're like,
Like, fuck it.
All right. So this is the kissing your cousin fight.
I mean, maybe I've got a hot cousin. I don't know.
I can't make any of the jokes that like came to mind right there. I mean, this fight, tell me who you think wins. I mean, we know what Sijara Eubanks was last time we saw her fight, what she likes to do, how she gets to victory. Is she going to be able to do it to Priscila Cachoeira?
I'm trying to find my notes for a second because I didn't expect this one to be the first one up. Sijara Eubanks has always been in this tough position where she could never really make flyweight. Even when she did, she wasn't really not performing at her peak there. But then she was kind of undersized for 135, so she kind of like this. She'd be perfect if there's a 130-pound weight class. I hope she makes weight again. This is you're 100% sure this is at 125. Like I'm sorry.
Every source I'm looking at says it's 125.
Okay. Yeah, that really concerns me. Now, on the feet, Sijara Eubanks, she's a point kickboxer from range. When she gets to the pocket, she does well to kind of unload some power shots. She can kind of get in the same rhythm, though. It doesn't change things up. She'll kind of get in the pocket through the same combination over and kind of get repetitive. Doesn't really surprise you with things. She's not gonna like throw a spinning back fist or something like that. She has a pretty good overhand right, and this like short left hook is pretty good. But she'll look for it way too much. I like her high kick. She will wrestle a little bit. She's got some good entries. She's definitely like a top side grappler. She's not much of a submission. For someone who's like is known for their grappling, she's definitely more of a position over submission person. But cardio is like I remember she did this interview once and she was so mad. Would be like, I have good cardio. There was like, you just completely slowed down that third round. It's a huge weakness for her. And getting down to 125 at, you said what, 37, 38? 37. Again, I don't know if she makes it. I don't know if it's going to look good. Cachoeira, I'll say this. I'm always going to start off. I've purposely left this in my notes on Cachoeira. Like, I'm going to continue to point out that, she's done this nice run, but let's not forget that she eye gouged Jillian Robinson. It probably shouldn't be in the UFC. She should have been let go for that. Back to what we've seen a person who has made great strides, and it's just from being a very aggressive striker, kind of just mean and kind of bullying people. She marches down her foes. She does need to learn how to cut off the cage. She's not technical. She's just kind of fierce. She kind of chases a little bit. But if she can learn how to cut off the cage, she gets in the pocket. She's violent, and she throws really hard shots. They kind of winging. She kind of tends to duck and throw. But we've seen this tons of power. I mean, she blasted Shayna Dobson. She blasted Gina Bazzani. She blasted Ariana Lipsy. Again, not the best fighters in the division, not even close. But it's just good to see her like building this confidence where she has, despite having some bad technique, she makes up for it with some really good power. Now she has some defensive striking holes. Like she drops her hands. She kind of leaves herself open counters. She kind of keeps her hands wide open. So jabs down the middle, teep kicks, stuff like that can really do some damage. She keeps her chin high too. I like that she will wrestle a little bit. I wouldn't call her wrestle, but she will shoot. Also like a topside grappler, but it gets a good grappler. I mean, Jillian Robinson smoked her in the ground. The other thing about Cachoeira, well, I always remember the Jillian Robinson fight. I also remember the Valentina Shevchenko where she took a beating and obviously extremely outclassed, but didn't give up. So I give her that. She's some toughness. So I want to pick Eubanks. I really do. She's more technical on the feet. She's more technical on the ground. I'm just done with her. She has not made any improvements. She's so inconsistent. She is gassed out and late. Now you're moving it down to 125, a weight class that just has not been well for her. I say Cachoeira presses the action. I say she eats a lot of shots from Eubanks, but I think Cachoeira's power. I think she's going to land some shots. I think she's going to stay in Eubanks' face. I think she's going to force Eubanks on her back foot. She's probably get taken down, but I think she'll make some scrambles and make it interesting as the fight goes deeper on. She might even get a takedown herself. So I'm going to go with Eubanks. Should be hard to finish. So I'm going to say Cachoeira by decision.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had anything to add to that, but you ticked off all the boxes I was going to. Mainly that it's tough to believe in Eubanks, someone with a historically difficult weight cut after a year off, going to be 38 in April. But on top of that, even if this was 3 months from her last fight, you pointed out the other thing. She hasn't really improved as a fighter. She's the same fighter that kind of bullied everybody in the Tough House, and then just, has kind of fizzled out in the UFC, as you pointed out, a tweener who doesn't really seem to have a comfortable weight class to fit into. That kind of I don't know, female Deron win. I don't. So I can't pick Eubanks with any confidence here either, because Cachoeira, she's a pretty good sized flyweight, like decent height, decent reach, even if she doesn't use it as well as she could. But just most importantly, just kind of physically big and strong. I don't think Eubanks is going to be able to do Eubanks things to her. I could see Cachoeira starting to catch Eubanks with some power shots inside and actually putting her down. But Eubanks, as you pointed out, has been historically very difficult to finish. Robertson did it with just much niftier grappling, which Cachoeira does not seem to have. So I'll go with Cachoeira by decision as well here. And as I said off the top of this segment, we don't know whether that constitutes an upset or not, but I'll come around and update with odds if we have them before I produce this show Sunday night. Next up, we have a men's flyweight matchup between Charles Johnson and Jimmy Flick. Johnson, the 31-year-old St. Louis native, is 12-3 overall. He's 1-1 since joining the UFC out of LFA. He lost his debut last July to Muhammad Mokaev by unanimous decision. Came back in November at UFC Fight Night, Zetiku versus Kudalaba, and took a split decision over Zhalgas Zhumagulov. He'll look to make it 2 straight against the returning Flick. The 32-year-old somewhat surprisingly retired 2 years ago after his flying triangle choke submission of Cody Durden all the way back at UFC Fight Night Thompson versus Neal. That was December of 2020. That was his UFC debut. It was his first fight out of the Contender Series. And within a few days after that, he announced his retirement and unretired a few months ago. Here he is coming back. Not sure what spurred it on, but I, for one, am glad to see anybody back who was throwing flying triangles on UFC fighters. He's 16-5 overall, 1-0 in the UFC, and he is a substantial underdog in this fight. Johnson minus 390. Flick plus 320. Something I should have mentioned during our intro to this card, this is a Bellator undercard in terms of the odds. Every single fight on the undercard has at least a 2-1 favorite. All but one of them have at least a 3-1 favorite.
Yeah.
And there is a 6-1 favorite on the undercard.
Did we find out like during his retirement, like he lost a lung or something? He's missing a hand. Like, what is going on over here? I get it. Charles Johnson, beat Zhumagulov, and he probably should be the favorite, but like 4-1 favorite.
I was shocked. And minus 390. I just took the DraftKings odds because they were kind of the median, but he was up close to minus 500 on some outlets. It's bizarre because here's the thing.
Like I wouldn't have Demetrius Johnson over Jimmy Flick. Or Charles Oliveira. Like, what the hell? Are we getting punked right now? We start off with Sijara. I feel like, where's Ashton Kutcher? He's gonna come out and say, "Oh, Ben's been joking with your keys." Like, did not start with Sijara Eubanks and 5-1 favorite Charles Johnson.
No, I mean. I don't know what to say about it, man. And it'll be interesting to see if those odds narrow up, either as sharps come in on Flick or people just start watching some tape. But
I just imagine some guy like working in like Vegas is setting the odds and just like, yeah, fuck it, let's just make a joke. And then he's like, dude, I didn't really think like people would take that serious. Like
I only lifted up for like 15 minutes. Yeah, the guy from Sherdog saw it. Yeah. I mean, the thing about Charles Johnson is he debuted in the UFC against Muhammad Mokaev, and you and I both said on that preview that this is a setup fight for Mokaev. Mokaev was the guy that wanted to make into a star, but we both thought Charles Johnson belonged in the UFC and was probably going to show it.
Yeah, agreed.
The problem is he looked pretty good against Zhumagulov, but he won a split decision, and I thought he lost the fight.
So did I.
So he's kind of like weaving back and forth from, I think, being underrated to overrated, but
yeah, be careful sometimes like ranking guys off of a like good loss.
Yeah,
it's still a loss.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've seen that where guys like sensational against somebody. What was the guy there against Tony Ferguson? But like prime Tony
Lando
Ferguson.
Venata.
Lando Venata. I'm going all crazy. Like, Lando Venata's top 10 guy.
Dude,
like, no.
Lando Venata is still in the UFC off of like having Tony Ferguson in trouble for like 2 minutes 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, I think he's literally a 500 fighter in the UFC, but we all remember that when he had like Tony Ferguson on ice skates.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. And poor Zhumagulov, just the unluckiest man in UFC history. The thing, I mean, Jimmy Flick, especially when he's cut down to 125, because early in his career, he fought at 135 as well. But at 125, because he's kind of a tall, rangy guy for the division, he gets ultra skeletal and he looks kind of like a mini Dustin Hazlett, and he fights kind of like a mini Dustin Hazlett. Like, he is as much of a specialist as you'll find in modern top level mixed martial arts. Like, he's a willing striker, but every fight starts in the feet. He throws kicks, he tries to box, but it's all clearly a means to an end. He wants to get his hands on the guy and get him down to the ground. I don't think he has much in the way of traditional wrestling entries. The most of the way I see him get people to the ground in the tape I've watched on him is like jiu-jitsu style stuff. Like, he'll try to take your back standing. He'll try to do just do a little arm drag from the clinch. I mean, in the local scene, I saw him pull guard. The question to me is, can Charles Johnson punish him for trying to do that? I mean, Johnson is I just said Flick is like a pretty big frame guy for flyweight. Charles Johnson is huge for flyweight. To the point of like, dude, how do you make 125? It's like that John Jones frame for it because he's got long, skinny legs. Yeah. Sijara Eubanks, like 5'3", and like, how do you make 125? Yeah. Again, Flick, what we saw of him was a pretty dominant grappling performance on the Contender Series, and then a first round flying triangle choke over 2 years ago. I can't imagine he retired and then spent the next 2 years at some monastery in Tibet, like honing his Shaolin Kung Fu skills. I'm thinking he's at best the same fighter he was when he left. Yeah. And I just don't think the Jimmy Flick bag of tricks is going to work on Charles Johnson. I'm expecting Charles Johnson to get his first real live uncontroversial UFC win here. Give me Johnson to win a pretty dominant decision over Flick. I just think his reach and his ability to use it well are going to keep Flick on the outside. Flick's probably going to be reduced to either getting chewed up at range or trying like low percentage ways to get the fight to the ground. I mean, look out for like some guard pulls, maybe even like an Imanari roll type thing. And it's just not going to work on Johnson. Give me Johnson to win all 3 rounds and kind of bust Flick up a little bit.
Yeah. So I agree with what you said about Flick. Like, everything I can base my knowledge off him is what I last seen. Like, again, I don't think he improved. He was this very unorthodox, unathletic fighter that was more just tough as nails kind of guy that everything he threw was to set up his ground game. He has major defensive holes. His main line of defense is pillaring, as you know I hate. He does have a large kicking game. I'll give him that. And he actually one of these few fighters that checks leg kicks. I give him a little more of a grinding style to his wrestling. Like, he can get in the clinch and grind in there because of that frame. He will wrestle, but I think you hit it like on the head. Like, he's not this power through your hips kind of guy. He's this. He can time a takedown. If a guy overextends on his shot, something like that, dropping down. But a lot of his takedowns are just kind of like gets shooting, get something happen, Tim Elliott style scramble, and somehow you end up on top or in the jiu-jitsu.
Tim Elliott style takedown game is the perfect way to describe it, dude. Like 5 stars.
But that's tricky though. Like, that really, because it's different than we people expect. It's hard to train for something like that. He does need to set up his takedowns better, his traditional takedowns. And a guy like Charles Johnson always had some pretty solid takedown defense. He'll also dive in Flick. He'll just like dive forward, get some desperation. But he's, like you said, he's good at winning some scrambles. He is a big time submission threat. He's very creative. I've seen him hit a lot of Von Flue chokes. What I like about him is that he just chains submissions Like he has that mindset. He's like, I don't need to get the submission while I have a triangle that I'm losing. I'm already positioning my arm to roll down to a knee bar or something. Like he understands that. And he just like you look at this Dana White Contender Series. He just like ran a gauntlet of a submission attempts on his opponent.
It reminds me of when you see someone grappling with like Ryan Hall in.
Yes, exactly. The one negative of that is that he plays BJJ. Like he's not thinking about trying to get back to his feet. Johnson, he's a good athlete. I agree with you. Like I thought Nurmagomedov beat him, but it wasn't like a robbery. I think it was a really close fight. He's got good movement. He's pretty elusive. He's light on his feet. He moves around really well, which makes him kind of like a hard target to hit. Would be a hard target to kind of shoot on. He's a kickboxer. Pretty good head movement. Depends a lot on rolling punches. A little bit of Bobby Green style to that. He hated the pressure for Nurmagomedov. Like that's where Nurmagomedov had his success. He constantly fights out of both stances, again, which can trick a lot of opponents. Good volume, kind of just touches, not a big power puncher, even though he's so big. He lacks that, like just one punch starts your kind of a game. He throws a lot of kicks, especially tape kicks. And he also throws them naked without any setup, which leave him open to counters. I like his step and knees a lot. He's not a wrestler, but he'll kind of like, I wouldn't say Tim Elliott style, but he's a guy that like he'll get on top because he caught a kick or something. He showed good takedown defense against Nurmagomedov. I've seen him in the past be on top, good ground and pound. He has 3 submission wins to his, to his credit. He has been taken down, like even though he showed some good takedown against Nurmagomedov, he has been taken down. But to his credit, he has shown ability to work back to his feet. And going back to like the LFA days, he's going hard all 5 minutes, and probably his cardio is what got him the win over Nurmagomedov. Now, on the feet, I agree with you. Johnson should just take advantage of that. On the ground, though, it should be Flick. So it's kind of really where is it going to be on the feet or the ground? Flick has taken down better wrestlers than Johnson. And being that Johnson throws so many kicks, I wonder if Flick would just like catch one and take him down. Or because of the threat of the takedown, it takes away such a big weapon of Johnson where he's not throwing it. So I say there's a way that Flick gets the fight to the ground. I think he just does what he does. He throws in some submission attempts, changes it, misses armbar, goes to a guillotine, goes to a omoplata, goes to this, goes to that. And I'm going to say Flick catches him. I'm going to say, fuck it. I'm going to go big with my first big upset of the year, apparently. I'm going to say Flick by first round submission.
There we go. Keith laying it out on the line, picking Jimmy Flick to make a successful comeback from his self-imposed 2-year retirement and pull it off as a greater than 3-1 underdog. That is why you come to the Sheldon Duffy Show. But bet responsibly. Next up at UFC Vegas 67 is a men's featherweight matchup between the debuting Isaac Dulgarian and Dan Argueta. Dulgarian, the 26-year-old Kansas City native, is 5-0 in his mixed martial arts career. As I said, this will be his UFC debut. He fought most recently at FAC 12 last February, where he knocked out Terry Britton in the first round. Welcoming him to the octagon will be Argueta. The 29-year-old New Mexico native is 8-1 overall. He's 0-1 in the UFC. He joined out of LFA last year, debuted in June against Damon Jackson, where he dropped a unanimous decision. That was at UFC Fight Night, Volkov versus Rosenstrike. And I believe Argueta was stepping up on short notice for that one because his last fight in LFA was just a couple weeks before that. Nonetheless, Argueta, comfortable favorite here. He's minus 220. And believe it or not, that's the closest line on the undercard. Argueta, minus 220, Dulgarian plus 175. Keith, I'm going to toss this to you first, but worth noting here that Isaac Dulgarian is a born, bred, and raised James Krause guy. He's 5-0. All of his fights have taken place in FAC, which is James Krause's promotion. He didn't found it, but he took it over. Like, he owned it until they dropped off of Fight Pass and divorced themselves from him hastily a couple months ago. And all of his amateur fights, I believe, took place in FAC as well. And he trained at Glory MMA and Fitness. I don't know if he does now. Like, I just literally stalked his social media to see if I could see him training somewhere else recently. But his most recent Instagram post was like 8 months ago. So, of course, he was at Glory.
Same with mine.
Yeah. I mean, my own posts, I is probably that old, but my wife tags pictures of me when we're at a restaurant. So, like, You can see my face there a lot. Anyway, I don't know where he's training now. All I know is he's in the UFC. It's not a short notice thing. He's just here on general merit. And he's a pretty substantial underdog. Tell us what we need to know about this guy and whether you think he gets it done.
I think we should have had him start the show. We should have had a guest and he explain these lines for us. If he's a James Krause guy, he'd know all about how the lines are working.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, don't bet on this fight. That's the only betting advice I'm going to give you. Like, don't bet on this fight.
Yeah. Sure dog should do. Maybe we should have Luca Fiore giving out betting advice and stuff. Like we should bring in James Krause. Just fuck it. Just do it all. Hey James, just own it and just give out betting advice. That'd be.
I'm thinking about our freelance budget. James, how'd you feel about $50 a week? I know you own like a line of Metro PCS stores and you invest in real estate, and obviously you banked away a ton from your Discord channel. How do you feel about $50 a week?
That's a lot of money for someone in jail. So
yeah, they buy you a lot of brownies and cigarettes.
Yeah. What's the signal in jail? He still have a better camera than Lev has. Love you, Lev.
We love Lev.
This fight, I actually think this fight's gonna be fun. Argueta, it's funny because I think he's undersized. He used to be a bantamweight, and you mentioned he took a short notice fight. And I'm surprised he's not fighting back down to bantamweight. But yeah, this fight, I believe, is at 145.
It is.
He's a southpaw that he does drop his hands, which I don't like, but he's a high output guy. He's a bit of a brawler. He gets in the pocket, just likes to land big power shots. He lacks head movements, makes him kind of very hittable. He likes to wrestle. He's got some good entries, pretty fast entries, good at winning scrambles. But he really struggled to stop takedowns from Damian Jackson. I mean, Jackson has put him on his back, held him there, backpacked him for like almost the entire fight. He did show some good submission defense against Jackson. I mean, there was, like I said, there was really long periods of time with Jackson on his back, and Jackson couldn't find a submission. So I like that, and he's got really good cardio. Like he tired out Damian Jackson. Jackson was the guy that was tiring out at the end of the fight, and it was Argueta that was, third round was.
You don't see that often.
Yeah, and he took it on short notice, which is pretty impressive. Dulgarian's 26 years old. Take out the James Krause, the Glory MMA, and what's going on with that. He's only been a pro for 2 years. And, I mean, he's been beating up some cans if you look at his record. You worry about that Glory Fitness. He's going somewhere else, someone else corner him. Who knows? He hasn't shown anything on the feet. Like, I just watch everyone's fights. He just shoots in right away. Like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, you look like, and people looking at his record on the screen right now, you're like, oh, well, he's got 3 TKOs and 2 submissions. Well, look at his TKOs.
Yeah,
it's all tapping on the ground.
But when you dig a little deeper into his background, though, I mean, this guy's a high level wrestler. He's an NCAA, NAIA national wrestling finalist, which is, it's not D1, but we've seen guys like that have a lot of success in MMA. Something about those, Division II, Division III junior college guys that just, the 135 world champion was a Division III wrestler. There's just something about it. So I like that. He's competing in some really high level freestyle, high Greco-Roman. He's got really good entries. He advances position on the ground really well. He's got good power, but he gets to the legs and just lifts guys up and just launches them. Hard ground and pound. He has a submission threat. Cardio is a question mark. He's never been out of the first round in his pro career. And from what I've seen in amateurs, he has all first round stoppage too. I know the amateur records aren't like the best. If Jay Petrie tells me what his amateur record, I 100% believe Jay. I never question Jay when it comes to it. So a lot of question marks. This is a huge step up in competition for Dulgarian, but I'm going with him. He's the better wrestler. Argueta throws really big shots. He really telegraphs his shots, and I really think that sets up some takedowns for Dulgarian. I think Dulgarian keeps him getting takedowns for the majority of the fight, keeps him on his back for a majority of 15 minutes. I don't think it's gonna be one of those fights where you're like, wow, Dulgarian really looks good. But I like a guy who's growing in the sport. I think it could be one of these ones where it's terrible and he gets knocked out quick because he doesn't have setups and he's purely a wrestler. But I saw Damian Jackson, who's not as good a wrestler,
as Dulgarian. Stylistically in MMA, I know maybe on paper it might be different, but stylistically not as good as wrestling. He was ragged on, throwing him around. So I'm going to say Dulgarian does this. I'm going to go another upset. Give me Dulgarian by decision.
Well, on the recap for this one, you are either going to be sitting pretty or there's going to be a sudden problem with your camera. And like, that's two, greater than 2-1 underdogs that you've picked here. And I can see that route to victory for Dulgarian because Argueta's defensive wrestling against Jackson, was kind of exposed. And I expect Dulgarian will probably get takedowns easily, early, and often in the early going. But a couple things that you mentioned are the things that stood out to me when I kind of watched Dulgarian, reminded myself about Argueta, and started thinking about this fight. There's something about Dulgarian, and I'm not saying it's an exact 1-to-1 comparison, but that kind of reminds me of when the Costi brothers came to the UFC out of the Contender Series, where they had they were like 7-0, 8-0, had thrashed everybody in the first round. It was mostly just because of superior wrestling, aggression, and just the physical strength and explosion to bully people. And especially, I think it was Lewis who lost his debut, where just he gassed out really badly when he couldn't finish his guy in the first round. And against a guy in Argueta that has proven, even against a normal cardio machine like Damon Jackson, that he has impressive cardio. And for all we know, that might be the reason he decided to stay at 145. Maybe he's like, man, I felt great. Maybe that's why.
That's a good point.
But to me, if Dulgarian takes Argueta down, pounds him out, or just, punches him up and then arm triangle chokes him in the first round, I'm not surprised. But if this thing gets to the end of the first round, I'm starting to feel a lot better about Argueta's prospects here. If it turns out that Dulgarian can maintain that kind of pace for as long as it takes to finish the fight, great. Then I will have learned something new about him. But until then, I do think he's just too much of an unproven product to think he's just going to run through Argueta like he ran through everybody in FAC. Because, there were some low-level fighters on his way up. So give me the favorite here, Argueta, this being just a little too much too soon for Dulgarian, but for all we know, he still has a ton of upside in this division. So I'll take Argueta by decision. Next up at UFC Fight Night 217 is another men's flyweight matchup. This one featuring Allan Nascimento and Carlos Hernandez. Nascimento, the 31-year-old Brazilian, is 19-6 overall. He is 1-1 since joining the UFC as a veteran of the first season of Dana White's Contender Series Brazil. He was not signed out of that appearance because he lost. He actually lost to Raulian Paiva, who did make it to the UFC. Took almost 3 years off after that appearance in 2018, came back in 2021, won one fight in Brazil, and then was drafted right into the UFC back in October of 2021, mostly because of probably his connection to Charles Oliveira and the whole Shooter Box Diego Lima team. You can tell by the bleached hair, they all got the macaco hair going. But he lost his UFC debut by split decision to Tagir Ulanbekov. No particular shame there. Came back last May at UFC on ESPN, Blachowicz versus Rakic, with a unanimous decision win over Jake Hadley. So he's back 7 months later, looking to make it 2 in a row at the expense of Hernandez. The 29-year-old American is 8-1 overall. He is on an 8-fight winning streak. He lost his pro debut and has been undefeated ever since, including stops in Hoosier Fight Club and one stop in LFA before making it to Dana White's Contender Series back in August of 2021, where he beat Daniel Perez by split decision. That punched his ticket to the UFC. He made his UFC debut almost a year ago. It was last February at UFC Fight Night Makhachev versus Green, where he took a split decision over Victor Altamirano. So he also will be looking to make it 2 wins in a row in the UFC. Hernandez is most decidedly not favored to do so. He is plus 300. Nascimento minus 365 as yet another substantial favorite on this undercard. Keith, I'm not saying that Allan Nascimento shouldn't be a minus 365 favorite over anybody in the UFC. I would leave that line to you, but should he be this big a favorite over Carlos Hernandez? Who you got in this one?
Yeah, this is tough. I don't know if he should be that big of a favorite. I definitely think he should be the favorite. I mean, he's pretty good. Like I like a lot of the things that I've seen of him. But Hernandez is tough. Like he's been scrappy so far. I don't think he's looked bad at his UFC debut. So I'll start with Nascimento. He's a really long and lengthy kickboxer. Very like basic striking, and I mean that in a compliment. Like he takes everything, just guy that just works on the basics. One clean 1-2s down the pipe. He's got pretty good power. He has a really big, complete kicking game. Kicks really everywhere because of that long range. I like when he gets into the pocket and he starts like slicing up elbows inside. He can use his height in the clinch, uses his knees really well. Well-rounded, good reactionary double. Not a great defensive wrestler, but that's because he's so comfortable off his back. Very similar to like his teammate Charles Oliveira. He's very flexible. He has like 9 submission wins. He's good at just kind of keeping those hips constantly moving, not staying like a guard, moving, throwing up sub attacks. Gets like triangles very easy with those long legs. He goes for heel hooks and leg locks is kind of like a little bit of his specialty. The one negative is he hardly looks for sweeps. Like he just keeps chasing submissions. Now, Hernandez, high volume striker, moves pretty well, good footwork. I like that he cuts angles when he attacks. He prefers to be the guy pressing the action instead of countering. He keeps everything inside tight. Good variety in strikings. I like that he adds knees to stepping knees. Good kicking game, hard kicks to body. He mixes his striking and his takedown attempts. He blends them together. He adds takedowns into his combination. They can throw a combination and shoot off of it. He's willing to grind in the clinch, dirty box. I don't know if Nascimento is the guy you want to do that with, but just like, a point moving forward. We'll go for takedown. He does. I like that he doesn't just stay, in someone's guard, old Tito Ortiz style. He looks to advance on the ground. Pretty good back takes. He has 4 submission wins. Not the best defensive wrestler, as he was taken down and submitted on the Contender Series. I don't like that, but he's got really good cardio, so he can press the action. I like Hernandez. I think he's good. I just think Nascimento is better in probably every single position. I think he gets the better of the exchanges on the feet. I think he uses his length really well. I think Hernandez might struggle to get inside, especially trying to get around those kicks. Add in the knees when he gets in close, add in the slice and elbow. So like long range isn't really ideal. That mid range isn't ideal. And then he's so good with this, if he goes for takedown, he's so good at winning scrambles, locking on submissions. So I think Nascimento might hurt him on the feet. I think he might lock in a submission. I say Nascimento kind of gets like a club and sub, or gets maybe gets on top, lands some ground and pound and finds submission. So give me Nascimento by second round submission.
Yeah, I definitely feel what you're throwing out there. Hernandez, you look at his record, you're like, oh man, he's got 8 wins and 4 of them are by submission. But that was very much when he was fighting lower level guys, on his local scene. I can't get past his Contender Series performance where Daniel Barrios took him down a lot in those first 2 rounds. I think if Nascimento gets him down in a lot of those similar situations and positions, that fight's over. And that's what I'm picking here. I'm with you. I think Nascimento, his better range and just his solid basic kickboxing. And I love that you put it that way, because doing the basics well will get you a hell of a long way in mixed martial arts.
Absolutely.
I mean, I remember when Frank Mir and Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira were coaching Tough, and Mir was talking to some of his guys, and he said that Nogueira had just bread and butter jiu-jitsu. And he didn't mean it as an insult, but it's like Big Nog was never going to put a Goga Plata on a guy.
Yeah, true.
He had sweeps, arm bars. He'd take your back, choke you out. That's what he had. And it made him one of the greatest grapplers in mixed martial arts history. Doing the basics well take you a long way. Anyway, Nascimento can probably get the better of things on the feet with Hernandez, but if he doesn't like what he's getting, I think he's going to be able to get the fight to the ground, whether with a conventional takedown or just you know, finding a way to drag him to the ground in the clinch just with his greater height and probably greater strength. And once they're down there, I do think it is Nascimento's world. He works well from his back, but when he finds himself on top, he is very good at getting down to business. Give me Nascimento by first round submission here. I mean, second round wouldn't surprise me either, but I do think this is not a great matchup for Hernandez. We head now to the men's bantamweight division for a matchup between Javid Basharat and Mateus Mendonca. Basharat, the 27-year-old Palestinian by way of the UK, is a perfect 13-0 as a mixed martial artist. He is a perfect 2-0 since joining the UFC out of the 2021 season of Dana White's Contender Series. He made his debut last year, went 2-0 in the UFC with unanimous decision wins over Trevin Jones in March and Tony Gravely in September. So he'll be looking to make it 3 in a row, kind of mint himself as a not just future contender, but sooner than later contender in the ultra competitive bantamweight division at the expense of the debuting Mendonca. The 23-year-old Brazilian is a perfect 10-0 as a professional mixed martial artist. He competed on Dana White's Contender Series last September, flattening Ashik Ajim in 48 seconds. That, along with, again, his teammate affiliation with Charles Oliveira, were enough to punch his ticket to the big octagon, where he has a tall task ahead of him, as he is yet another massive underdog here. Mendonca plus 300, Basharat minus 365 as the substantial favorite. Keith, I'm going to throw this one to you for your pick first, but something I kind of broached off the top during the intro. This is a card where it's easier to get excited about individual fighters, I think, than actual matchups. Like, I mean, the undercard is all squash matches.
Yeah, I agree.
But you know, between Basharat and Umar Nurmagomedov, who we'll be talking about in a little while here, which guy would you say you'd be?
I mean,
and they're in the same division. Like,
yeah, it's kind of unfair because I feel like Nurmagomedov is a little ahead of him at this point. Like, he's facing higher level competition of the two. Man, it's I'd say Nurmagomedov because his last name's Nurmagomedov. Like, that goes a long way.
And you know what the funny thing is? Let me throw something out here and tell me if you agree, because I agree that Nurmagomedov seems ahead of him. I mean, dude, he's fighting Honey Barcelos, who.
Yeah, well, I know. I think. Let me guess what you say. I mean, well, I'll say this: Basharat's like taking a step back. Like, he fought Tony Gravely in his last fight, which is a really good win.
Yeah. So
I should have said, like, on this card, he's like ahead of him in the competition. Like, he's facing, like you said, Barcelos. Well, Basharat's taking on Mendonca,
a Contender Series guy that.
Yeah,
like,
man, I just really like both guys.
I really like both guys too, but I'm not too surprised by the matchups here because it feels like Nurmagomedov is ahead, but dude, they're not that far apart in age. They're not that far apart in record. Like, they're 13-0, 15-0. They're 2-0 in the UFC, 3-0 in the UFC. But Nurmagomedov is being booked like a contender and potential contender. Basharat's being booked like a potential star.
Okay.
Basharat is being booked like you would book a cocky UK fighter who happened to win their first two fights in the UFC. Like, can they get a little like Paddy Pimblett type squeeze out of him at the same time he's actually rising up the ranks? You know, I think there may be a little bit of that to it.
Yeah, I'm still gonna go with Nurmagomedov. I go back to that Brian Kelleher fight where he ran through. I mean, not like a great guy, fighter, but like a hard, tough vet, and he just ran right through the guy.
Only great fighters run over Brian Kelleher.
Exactly. Like, he looked like. But that said, like, these two guys are fighting each other for the title one night. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I think the ceiling is that high for both of them.
Dude, best thing I can say about Brian Kelleher is Brian Kelleher was the guy that had his hand like sticking straight up in the air to fight Sean O'Malley, and the UFC was like, hell no.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, when Sean O'Malley needed the short opponent. Yeah.
And I would take O'Malley to beat him right now, but he still could be tricky.
Yeah, it's still he's a tricky guy, and he can be a tough guy to look great against. Like, you might not get something for the highlight reel. I mean, that's when they brought in Rhode Island's finest, Chris Matinho. Like,
and fairness to Basharat, like, he took on a really tough guy in Tony Gravely and looked fantastic. So, Basharat is very technically sound. Like he's one of the guys. I think I might have more notes on Basharat than anybody else on this card. Like he's just one of those guys when you watch 15 minutes of his fight, it just everything jumps off the page at you. Like he does everything well. He's I'm not everything, but you get my point. Like there's so many things he does well. He's a Muay Thai style. I mean, you want me to continue, right?
Yeah. And
yeah.
Between his Contender Series appearance and his 2 UFC fights, we've got almost 45 minutes of tape on him, and he's shown every phase of MMA.
Exactly.
I'm not surprised your notes are long.
Yeah, exactly. Like he shines at everything. He's so well-rounded. He's a Muay Thai specialist that is a really good striker. He can fight out of both stances. What jumps out to me is just how comfortable and calculated and composed he is. Great vision, very accurate, really good at keeping his distance, quick jab. He's good at like following that jab up with like sliding in the pocket, just landing some shots, getting right back out of range. Good hand fighting, and he gets in the air. He's really good at like grabbing the hands, using it to cut an angle and attack around it. I love that he goes to the body. I love, and I say this, but everyone does this. I love the way he cuts angles. He has good footwork. He switches in mid combination, so he's like generating power, but also changing the angle that he's coming at his opponents, and then sliding off the center line. He's just really good. Nice power. Really good kicking game. Deep kicks up the middle. Calf kicks are a big part. He checks leg kicks, which nobody does, especially early in their career. I mean, he was landing this devastating step and knee that was just crushing Tony Gravely. I think the worst thing with striking, in this could easily be fixed, is that he can be a little low output at times, like almost looking for the perfect shot, and he might even like keep fights a little closer than it could be by not like kind of just like riding in a like sports car with your dad when you were like 12 and you're like, Dad, gun it to 100, and he's like doing 80, and he's like, I'm doing 80. This is really fast. You're like, Dad, like gun it to 100. Like that's him. Like, come on, just gun it to 100, dude. Because if he does, he's gonna put people out. But the other thing about his Muay Thai style, he has some like Muay Thai. Say, for example, he does back up on the center line, and he does kind of keep his chin a little high, and he can hang his hands low. Those are like some defensive things. But because of that style, he throws some weird angles. But he can wrestle. I mean, he took down Tony Gravely, who's all about wrestling. He's not your traditional wrestler, but he was just really good at winning scrambles, winning the position, not giving up on positions, and like beating Tony Gravely to the point, like winning the high point in wrestling. He's good at like getting takedowns by catching kicks. He showed when Gravely was trying to be the offensive wrestler, extremely good takedown defense. Very good topside grappling. He was advanced in position on the ground. He just has some strong ground and pound, 6 submission wins, and strong cardio. Like some of that cardio is because he's cruising at 80, you know. Mendonca, there's not much film on him. So like take this for what it's worth, what I've seen. I love that he's only 23. And his athleticism, you can see it. He's a great athlete, very explosive, very powerful. Striking, very explosive type strikes. He does a lot of teep kicks up the middle. He has some defensive hold. He's very hittable. He doesn't set up his kicks, leaves them open counters, but he's a good grappler. He needs to control a little bit more. He's more of he definitely would BJJ, like trying to catch you in a submission, lose position, chasing the submission, but he has 4 submission wins. So again, like I had one guy has all this notes, the other guy, there's not that much film, so I kind of limited to what the notes I can come up with. So Mendonca doesn't have as much film as I would like. But what I've seen, I think it's a pretty good addition based on his athleticism. But Basharat is so good. I think he avoids the power shots of Mendonca, which I really think is his best chance of just landing a big shot. With Basharat making a bad decision by dropping his hands, keeping his chin high, something like that. But I think he avoids that things. I think he lands crisp shots. I think he lands some power shots. I think he gets some takedown zones. I think from on top, he starts pounding out the jiu-jitsu guy. And I say we haven't seen a stoppage yet from Basharat in the UFC. I think he gets it this fight. Give me Basharat by second round TKO from ground and pound.
There we go. People who are used to watching this show, you probably noticed that sometimes I will go first when we're talking about a matchup. Sometimes I'll hand it to Keith first. I'll let you in a little bit on my thought process behind. My first thought is, by default, I will give them to Keith first. Just, Keith is much more of the tape.
You're a gentleman. Analyst. That's being a gentleman.
I'm a gentleman. Yeah, I open doors for people. But Keith is more the tape head. And
plus, I'm going to interrupt you anyways if you try to go first.
And if I try to go first, we talk over each other. If there are fights that I have a particular insight on, or I feel really strongly about, or I'm about to pick a massive upset and I don't want to let him steal my thunder, I'll go first. But then there's somewhere I'm like, I couldn't find any tape on this dude. I'm totally just going to chicken out and throw this to Keith. And this was that one.
There was a guy last year, I can't remember who it was. I'm like, oh my God, I have nothing to say. Like, I'm just going to copy every single thing Ben says. And you're like, all right, Keith, go first.
Well, then you should throw it right back and be like, dude, I couldn't find tape either. And then we'll just.
I was just going to be like, oh, he's got good hand speed. I'm like, yeah, got some pretty quick hands.
The thing with Mateus Mendonca is he turned pro like right after his 20th birthday. He fought like 7 or 8 times in his very first year as a pro in low level Brazilian promotions. Like Future FC is the only one that even had videos available, and they were like potato quality videos. And that was before like a long layoff and then returning on the Contender Series, and he's still just 23. So who knows how informative more tape even would have been of this, kid barely out of his teens. But it almost doesn't matter because I am this high on Basharat. I love everything you said about him, like not just his striking, because that's kind of what you expect from the way he presents, but his well-roundedness, his wrestling. I love that on his fight on the Contender Series. Yeah, he's taking on Aron Kalen, who was like 40 years old and had kind of an overinflated record, but was a legitimately very good judoka. And almost as if to prove a point, Basharat took him down in the first half of the first round. And that was just the ball rolled down from hill from there. He beat the crap out of the guy for 2.5 rounds, 2 3/4 rounds. Like Basharat doesn't even have the thing that you normally get when a hot shit striker debuts in the UFC. Well, like, let's just see what it looks like when he takes on a wrestler. 1, because he's shown he can wrestle offensively. 2, he took on Tony Gravely in a second UFC fight and he was fine. That's what makes me excited for him. And that's what makes the question about him and Umar Nurmagomedov more intriguing, because if Basharat was just a one-dimensional striker, it'd be an easy question to answer. Well, anyone named Nurmagomedov against a Muay Thai guy, we know what that's going to look like. But here, I would love this to be the kind of fight where Basharat does in fact step on the gas a little bit and shows the gap in skill and shows what he could do, maybe to higher level fighters if they'll book him against him. Give me Basharat not just to win here, but to go out and kind of make a point. You picked him by second round TKO. I'll take third round. I'll take third round. Like, give me Basharat to maybe take a little of the first round, not having seen any more tape than we have and being a little bit careful, but then turn up the jets and make this academic. Yeah, Basharat by third round TKO. Second from the top at the UFC Vegas 67 prelims is a lightweight matchup between Mateus Rebecki and Nick Fiore. This will be the UFC debut for both men, but that is where the similarities stop more or less. Rebecki, the 30-year-old Poland native, is 16-1 overall. He fought on the Contender Series on August 30th, choking out Rodrigo Lidio in like 3 minutes. I believe that is his 13th or 14th win in a row. Most of those took place in FEN, which is sort of Poland's next tier down promotion. Like beneath KSW, FEN is kind of like their AAA ball. Anyway, 13 straight wins. He will look to make it 14 straight at the expense of Fiore. The 6-0 New Hampshire native, product of New England Cartel. He's also affiliated with Renzo Gracie, New Hampshire. I don't know if that's like the Exeter location or or the the new one in Bedford.
Hey, I don't pay attention to northern New England. I'm a southern New England guy, man.
Maybe if you come down and train with Connecticut's finest, like Glover Teixeira, you'd like.
That's right. Rhode Island, Mass, and Connecticut. None of that Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire nonsense.
His 6-0 pro record includes 1 stop in CES, and that's actually kind of the peak of it. The rest of it has all taken place in Combat Zone. I'm not even sure that's New Hampshire's top promotion, but he won there as recently.
That's Calvin Cater's promotion.
Oh, okay. There you go. His last appearance was at Combat Zone 78. That was last November. That was good enough to get him in here as a late replacement for Omar Morales, who had originally been scheduled to take on Rebecki. Reflecting perhaps the difference in experience, level of competition, the fact that one fighter is a short notice replacement. This is the widest line on the card. Rebecki is minus 600, Fiore plus 450. Keith, you just said that you don't pay as close attention to Northern New England MMA as to Southern New England, but I assure you, you are more plugged into both of them than I am. So I am absolutely tossing this one to you first. Nick Fiore. Sometimes when a 6-0 late replacement comes to the UFC, I will say, okay, this guy was already on my radar and he's someone I expected to see on the Contender Series or even in the UFC within the next 12 to 18 months. Like, David Onama was someone that I said that about. Charles Johnson, who's on this card. Nick Fiore was not on my radar. In fact, I was like, Nick Fury? Isn't Sam Jackson like 75 years old? No, Nick Fiore.
Samuel Jackson's character in the superhero movies.
Yeah. No.
Honestly, Samuel Jackson has probably the same chance to win this fight as Nick Fury does. So
that hurts. I mean, give me your take on this fight.
Yeah. So Nick Fury, he's 25 years old. He's the thing about him, he's been training since he was a teenager. I know he was like 13 years old or something. He said he's big for the weight class. You mentioned he's 6-0, but this dude has beaten like the elite bums of MMA.
He has 2 wins against Jay Ellis in his 6 fights.
He has 6 wins. 4 of the guys have losing records. And you mentioned Jay Ellis has over 100 losses. Yeah. In fairness to him, one of the fights with Jay Ellis was like a last minute. His opponent dropped out and Jay Ellis got thrown in like 2 days. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, that was the second, the rematch. The much anticipated rematch between Nick Fury and Jay Ellis. His last opponent has a record of 5-20. Like, that's not who you fight before you get in the UFC. Fury, he's a minus athlete. He's kind of flat-footed. He's pulls his head straight back. He throws a lot of kicks, but he's a guy who wants to get the fight to the ground. He will shoot for a takedown, but he is definitely more of a like BJJ grappler than he is a wrestler. I would say he's a weak wrestler. He really telegraphs his entries. He is a BJJ black belt. He's pretty good at getting subs from his back. I think he had this one fight against, obviously fighting the tomato can. We got like a really nice armbar. Rebecki's a southpaw, short, compact guy, bob and weave type style. One of these guys, he's willing to eat a punch and land one of his own, but he's got some good power. He's got 8 knockouts. He's a very good wrestler too. We saw it in the Contender Series. He's very physically strong. Just picked up his opponent a couple of times and slammed him. Good topside control. I love that he looks to pass on the ground. Good ground and pound. He has 6 submission wins, and he's shown in the past he can go hard 25 minutes. It's funny because I've been like categorized as this guy who's anti-New England MMA. I want New England MMA to be the number 1 region in the world. It just isn't, and it isn't close. And the issue is, there's so many issues. I'm not going to go on a rant. No one wants to hear any of it, but there's so many issues with the New England regional scene. But one of the biggest things is we have guys who aren't ready for the UFC getting put in the UFC. Because why? There's a million reasons, no reason to go down that path. But Fury isn't ready for the UFC. He's not close to being ready. Like, I wouldn't have suggested him for the Contender Series. Now, I'm not anti Nick Fury. Like, I want this guy to be successful. I kind of hope he wins. It's just not going to happen. Like, Rebecki's going to maul him. He's going to land some hard shots. He might knock him on the feet. If he doesn't, he's going to pick him up. He's going to slam him on his head. He's going to land some hard shots. If Fury shoots on him, he's just going to like sprawl on him and slam him. He's going to pound him, and maybe he finds submission. So I'll say Rebecki beats him up until the submission happens, and then he submits him. Rebecki by first round submission.
I mean, What can I add to that? Like, I would have been happy with a little bit more of a rant. Like, if people don't like the rants, timestamps are there for a reason.
Okay. Fuck it. Fuck it. Tyson Chartier is a really good person. Like, I like him a lot. I've met him because sometimes we talk every time we see him. I like the guy. I consider him a friend. He's a really good person. Family guy. He really cares about his fighters. He's like one of these guys who's super proud of the success of guys like Rob Font and Calvin Kattar. Like, not the success of his success, but of like their success. He's one of these guys who's happy. The one thing about Tyson is he has this unbelievable belief in his people, which is obviously can be a good thing, but the bad thing is it can be a bad thing. And I think that's the case with like a Fiore and other guys in the past where he has such belief in these guys that he talks them into what they aren't. And Fiore's not a UFC. I don't think that Tyson's goal is to get these guys in the UFC and get them hurt. Like, no, he's not. I think he really does care about these people. I just think it's just one of these. He has an unbelievable belief, and it's cool. He's like that kid who has his 12U baseball player who doesn't open on the 14U team, and he goes, "Oh, it's gonna make him better. Let's go move up." And that's cool in baseball when you strike out. It's not cool in MMA when you get high kicked in the face or you get pounded out. And that's what's gonna happen. Like, Nick Fury is not ready. I will gladly eat my words. I hope I'm wrong. I just don't think so. I think this guy's gonna get embarrassed.
I think that's a take on the situation it's fair and it's not unkind, because, and this might be a better discussion to have at length after this fight, because if Fiore lamps a man and he's
I hope I'm an idiot.
Yeah,
like I hope I'm an idiot.
But moving to the UFC level too soon can actually hamper a prospect's development. Like, look at someone like Mickey Gall or Chase Hooper, where you get pulled up super green, super young, and instead of staying in your regional scene and fighting 5 times a year and having like smokers at your gym and fighting people appropriate to your level, you're in the UFC and they can't. There aren't people there aren't appropriate matchups for you.
Yeah,
because the thing is, if Fiore loses badly to Rebecki, that's no more than expected. But now he's probably going to get 2 more fights in the UFC, and if they're even against people who won on the Contender Series, they might be too much for him right now.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
But that's another 12 to 18 months kind of cut out of his development, preparing for fighters that are hopelessly above his level, when he could have been actually developing maybe into a UFC level talent during that time. I mean, he's 25 years old. So,
but what? In fairness, you could have said the same thing about John Jones when he first entered the UFC.
Yes, John
Sure,
Jones.
I didn't. I actually called the Sherdog Radio Network and told him he's going to be a superstar, but a lot of people probably didn't believe in him.
And everything for him seemed to be too soon. He blew through all the obstacles, even when he got the short notice title shot against Shogun. It's like, well, this is too soon. No, I'll
gladly have Tyson and Nick laugh at me every time I see them in person.
Sure. I mean, you never been afraid to like admit when you're wrong. Just I'm interested to see how this turns out, but I definitely see where you're coming from on that one. For me, I mean, I would have favored Rebecki against Omar Morales too. Rebecki, I'm not saying he's that level, but in terms of his build, his athleticism, and his tool set, he's kind of like poor man's Michael Chandler. His wrestling works because he's as strong and explosive as he is. Like, Michael Chandler's a great technical wrestler, but he also finishes takedowns that you shouldn't be able to finish, except that, you sprawled, but I'm just going to hoist your leg up in the air and throw you across the cage anyway. Like, Rebecki gets some of that, and then, stays compact with boxing, lots of hard hooks, doesn't have great reach, but quick enough on his feet that at least against the competition he's been fighting, he's been able to get inside. Yeah, it all just reminds me of like a geared down Michael Chandler archetype. I do think that's going to be way too much for Fiore here. I'll take Rebecki by I'll say first round TKO. Probably happens on the ground. Maybe he hurts him on the feet. They go to the ground. If anything, Fiore is capable of taking care of himself on the ground. You know, he's a good grappler. You know, comes from good training background. I expect that if he's given the choice between eating a couple more shots and giving up his back, he might just take the extra couple shots. So give me Rebecki by first round TKO, ground and pound. The top prelim at UFC Fight Night 217 is a middleweight matchup between Claudio Ribeiro and Abdul Razak Alhassan. Ribeiro, the 30-year-old Brazilian, is 10-2 as a professional mixed martial artist. This will be his UFC debut. He won his way into the UFC in his appearance on Dana White's Contender Series last August, where he knocked out Ivan Valenzuela in just 25 seconds. That punched his ticket. He'll look to make his official Octagon debut, a successful one, at the expense of Alhassan. The 37-year-old Dallas native is 11-5 overall. He's an even 5-5 in the UFC. He lost his last time out. It was a split decision against Joaquin Buckley at UFC Fight Night, Walker versus Hill last February. That's got him back into the red, basically, after his 17-second head kick knockout of Alessio Di Chirico that probably saved his job because he had been on a 3-fight losing streak leading up to that. He's, 1-4 in his last 5 fights. Looking to turn things around here, and the UFC managed to find somebody that he is actually the favorite against, because Alhassan is -120. Ribeiro available at even money, +100 right now. Here's the thing about Claudio Ribeiro, and we've said this about a couple other fighters on this card already, but this is what you get when you give us Dana White's Saturday Night Contender Series. We have a bunch of people that have a spectacular win on the Contender Series last year, and then a bunch of low-level regional fights, and that's what we have to go on. And Ribeiro is one of those. Ribeiro iced Valenzuela on the Contender Series. I loved it because Valenzuela tried this terrible spinning back fist. Ribeiro plunked him, and then he did the Igor Vovchanchin to Francisco Bueno thing and managed to punch him in the head again on the way down. Ribeiro's already going down. He's already on the astral plane, and Ribeiro hits the moving target, and to do that when you've already decided I'm going to throw a left hook and a right cross.
Yeah.
And you managed to change the vertical. I mean, you've
John Wick shit, right?
Yeah, and you as somebody who have you fought, you've trained MMA fighters, you've dealt with boxing.
Oh yeah, that was my move. Hit him and then hit him again. Yeah, I was known for.
But, making an adjustment mid punch to a vertical change in your opponent's position is tougher than horizontal. Your punch is already swinging through an arc. At best, maybe you do the Frank Mir on Todd Duffy thing and end up clotheslining him instead of hitting him with a clean punch, and he still goes down. But for you to pinpoint that cross on somebody's head that's already dropping, that's nasty stuff. Unfortunately, it took place in 25 seconds. All we know is that Ribeiro iced a pretty bad fighter who just happened to be twice his size. It's problematic because Ribeiro has fought at welterweight before. He weighed in for that Contender Series fight at 181. And again, Valenzuela dwarfed him. If he has a future in the UFC, and I'm not sure he does, it might not be at 185. It's not going to hurt him here because he's taking on one of the shortest, most compact guys in the division in Alhassan, who's a former welterweight himself. But yeah, his long time home is probably not at 185 because he didn't look especially drained or ripped at 181.5 on the Contender Series. And before the Valenzuela fight, he has a bunch of first round knockouts, but they're of bad fighters. And he looks to me, he looks like a sloppy brawler. He got the best of a sloppy brawl at the best possible moment with Dana White sitting 20 feet away. And that's what I can say for Claudio Ribeiro. Alhassan on the other side, he's a frustrating fighter, and he's on like I said, he's 1-4 in his last 5 fights, and the only win in that space is over Alessio Di Chirico, who just, isn't UFC material. But he's not been losing to bad guys. All the guys that Alhassan's lost to are at least solid UFC roster material, and he's been in most of those fights generally competitive. like I feel comfortable saying that Abdul Razak Alhassan right now is a like bottom third of the middleweight division, but you know, he belongs in the UFC. He'll get cut if he loses here, but it won't be because he's the worst guy in the division. Like, you know, the only way I see Alhassan losing this fight is if he does something really dumb and gets countered by Ribeiro, which, I mean, he's shown he...
I've seen Alhassan fight before.
I saw the Caleb Williams fight, so that is something that could happen. The thing is, Alhassan, in his fights with both Jacob Malkoun and Joaquin Buckley, he did try to bring the fight to the ground. He did try to do something other than just engage in a wild brawl. And I'm interested to see what happens if he tries that on Ribeiro, who really is kind of an unproven product on the ground. I don't know what his wrestling defense looks like. I don't know what his, you know, bottom position game looks like if he tries to sweep or just tries to stand back up or tries like lousy submissions from the bottom. I have no idea. But I am picking Abdul Razak Alhassan to embrace his inner judo thunder and, you know, try to bring Ribeiro to the ground. I'm guessing that he's going to try it early too. Alhassan has to know he's fighting for his job here. He has to know he's, you know, in LFA or Fiore in his next fight. If he loses here, he wants to cling to that UFC spot. He doesn't want like the plane ride home with Saif Saud next to him, like being all quiet. Give me Alhassan to win a decision here. A crummy fight, but one that keeps Alhassan his job and shows us the ceiling on Ribeiro really quick.
All right. So you did something major wrong. There's no way Saif Saud is ever quiet. I just imagine him being on the plane still like yelling at somebody.
Dude, here's the thing, and nobody believes me, but on his way up until like I'd say 2018 or so, like the first few times I interacted with him, saw him at regional events, first time or two I interacted with him at UFC events, he was quiet, reserved, like he had much more of a Greg Jackson vibe than like a Ray Longo vibe. Something in him snapped when Johnny Walker hit all those illegal strikes to the back of the head.
I remember that
on
Ryan Spann.
Ryan Spann. Something snapped because like he was yelling his head off there, and he has been
just kept going.
Yeah, he turned into the Hulk, and he just never turned back. You know, one day he's gonna turn back from the Hulk. He's gonna be Saif Saud. He's gonna wake up with like some ripped jeans on and nothing else, and be like, "What happened? Is it still 2019?" Like, yeah, that's
like a 30 for 30 on him. Like, what if I told you that Saif Saud, you just be quiet? Oh yeah, he maybe had like he went to like a Tony Robinson like convention, like get into your inner beast or something. I don't know. It's funny that Alhassan is 37, but I always think of this guy as a prospect. Like I would have guessed he was like 30, and like he's so much older than I think. He has quick hands. He's explosive. It's as you mentioned, he has this like one punch fight ending power with both his hands and his feet. He's always been good at hand fighting. Throws a lot of kicks. Adds kicks to his combos. Doesn't check leg kicks. Really open to that. Definitely worried about his chin as he's been knocked out a lot of times. You mentioned he will go for takedown. I think it's a little rare, but maybe something as he's aged, he'd realize the importance of that. You mentioned his the judo background. Like he's judo in name only. Like I don't know. I don't remember him ever like hitting a judo.
He went to the same judo school as like Hector Lombard.
Yeah. Or he's like that the guy who goes to like the judo class the first day and he starts buying all the clothing and stuff, or the guy who goes to like the jiu-jitsu class and he comes out with like all the clothing. His takedown defense was absolutely terrible against Jacob Malkoun, and he's historically had some bad cardio. Now Ribeiro, what I've seen of him, minus athlete, you mentioned it, flat-footed, bit of a stationary target, counter striker. He's got a good right hand when he throws it straight, and a pretty good check left hook. And he definitely does best when he's pressing the action. But you mentioned a lot of his strikes are just looping, very telegraphed. He has serious power. He has 9 knockouts, 8 in the first round. I've seen him actually land power shots while backing up, which is a rare thing. But his technique is bad. His chin high in the air. He's been rocked a lot. He can take a beat. I'll give him that. I definitely think his best position is, even though he does a lot of things wrong in brawl, that's probably his best thing he can do is get in the brawl, blocking and brawl. Hard calf kicks. I've seen some takedown defense. Doesn't even seem like he wants to go to ground at all. I watched one fight. We went 25 minutes with the guy, and what I was impressed is his cardio sustained. Like, it was a brawl, and he was still throwing bombs in the fifth round. So that was really impressive. So I hate picking against Alhassan because, like, at any time he can smash a dude, but I don't trust his cardio. I don't trust his chin. And then I watch Ribeiro, and you really feel like when you watch this guy, it's one punch, knock you out kind of guy. Even though I just did talk about him going hard for 25 minutes, but it's still like him landing one shot and putting you out. And that obviously can happen with a guy like Alhassan who has durability issues. That's why if I'm Ribeiro, I'm telling him, like, get in brawl, make this a brawl, get right in Alhassan's face and start throwing some bombs. I agree with you that Alhassan has fixed some of his issues, especially the cardio issues. I had like a New Year's resolution that I'm not taking Alhassan anymore. But like every New Year's resolution, you break them the first week of January. I'm not picking, with any confidence, but I'm going to take Alhassan though I don't want to. He's faster. He throws straight shots instead of these looping punches. I say he wins a decision.
There we go. 2 picks for Abdul Razak Alhassan to win and presumably keep his UFC roster spot in the top prelim. The 5-fight main card of UFC Vegas 67 opens up with a 135-pound men's matchup between Umar Nurmagomedov and Raoni Barcelos. Nurmagomedov, the 26-year-old Dagestani, is a perfect 15-0 as a professional mixed martial artist. He is 3-0 since joining the UFC as a veteran of several top-level promotions, including Fight Night's Global, Professional Fighters League. He fought most recently last June, taking a unanimous decision over Nate Maness. That marked the first time that he had even heard the final horn in a UFC fight. Previous to that, he had finished Brian Kelleher and Sergey Morozov, both by rear naked choke. He'll look to keep the good vibes going and mint himself as perhaps a title challenger once the whole sticky situation solves itself at the top of this division against Barcelos. The 35-year-old Brazilian, 17-3 overall. He is 6-2 since joining the UFC as the outgoing bantamweight champ in RFA before it even became half of LFA, which should tell you how long he's been in the UFC. And when you start counting that on your fingers, 6-2 is not a whole lot of fights to have. Barcelos, always competitive, has been hampered by relatively low activity, some injury layoffs, a few canceled fights, has fought just 8 times in, what is that? Almost 7 years that he's been in the UFC, 6 or 7 years that he's been in the UFC. He did win his last time out. It was a unanimous decision over Trevin Jones at UFC Fight Night, Dern versus Jan in October. That allowed him to snap the first losing streak of his career. Those were decision losses to Victor Henry and Timur Valiev at UFC 270 and UFC Fight Night, Gane versus Volkov, respectively. Barcelos looking to keep the winning ways going here. He is not favored to do so. He is the second biggest underdog on the card after Fiore. Barcelos right now plus 390 or so. Nurmagomedov floating around minus 500. Keith, you and I got pretty excited in the moment after Barcelos win over, I think it was either Said Nurmagomedov or Khalid Taha, and sort of ticked off people in the bantamweight top 15 that we would favor him against. I mean, that didn't age well because we went on to lose back-to-back fights, but I still don't feel bad about that because he felt like a guy who was well-rounded, athletic, and honestly really dominant in his UFC run. He had been on like a massive, like 12 or 13 fight winning streak. And it seemed like the only thing that could delay him was his own inactivity, his own propensity for injuries. Even after the win over Jones, he still feels to me like a guy that got old overnight.
Yeah.
Like Barcelos is just not the guy that we were praising to the rafters 2 years ago.
No.
I mean, and which makes me understand why he's such a massive underdog to Nurmagomedov, because Nurmagomedov, I mean, he's a Nurmagomedov. Like, you know, we've said there's a continuum of Dagestani fighters. There's the ones who just all they've got is the grind. And, you know, if they're standout athletes, you get Khabib Nurmagomedov. If they're just so-so, you get Rustam Khabilov and a lot of decision wins.
They're the Kennedy family of MMA without tragedy. Take out the tragedy part.
And on the other end, you got guys that know how to wrestle, but prefer to just do all spinning shit all the time. You know, you've got your Muslim Salikov types, Zabit Magomed Sharipov, you know, may his career rest in peace. Nurmagomedov is definitely more.
He might be coming back.
Oh, that would be amazing.
I think it's going to be on the John Jones heavyweight title fight card.
Okay, so 2027. All right. Nurmagomedov, he tends a little more to the grindy side of that continuum, but most importantly, his game has just seemed so airtight. All of his wins in the UFC have felt really, really inevitable right up until the moment they happened. Like we talked about Brian Kelleher earlier as someone who's he's a tough out, only the best of the best really just run the guy over. And Nurmagomedov, damned if he didn't just run him over. Like Sergey Morozov knows how to grapple, and just Nurmagomedov gave him no breathing space whatsoever. Barcelos, he's a guy that at his best, he was well-rounded. You know, I think he sees himself as a striker first, but like a guy that's a good, he was a good wrestler, a good grappler, but even at his best, this is just a bad matchup for him. I expect Nurmagomedov is going to absolutely suffocate Barcelos here. 2 years ago, Barcelos might have had the speed advantage on the feet. I always thought, you know, like he had like fast hands when he decided to kick, you'd have fast kicks, pretty decent footwork. I don't know if he has a huge advantage there anymore. And I don't think they're going to spend much time there. I think Nurmagomedov is going to take Barcelos down. I would say early and often, but it's only often if Barcelos manages to keep getting up. And I don't know how long that will keep going on, because Umar has the Khabib thing of, I'll wrestle you, I'll control you, I'll do mat returns when I need to, and the whole time you'll get tired faster than I will.
Yeah.
And Gas Tank has not been Barcelos' friend in the last 2 or 3 years. So yeah, I understand why the odds are what they are here. And if I went in for betting things like the lock of the night, even as good a fighter as Barcelos is, you know, aside from like, again, the short notice debut of Nick Fiore, this one feels kind of like a lock, and it's more down to Nurmagomedov than Barcelos. This is going to be suffocating. Give me Nurmagomedov. I'm going to say third round submission, but third round TKO on the ground would not surprise me either.
Yeah, I agree a lot that you're saying. Nurmagomedov, he's just such a complete fighter. He's an elite athlete with great footwork, very elusive. He can very technically sound. He can fight at both stances. He's just like Taekwondo style striking to him, where his hands are kind of secondary. Like his boxing, I would say, is serviceable, but his kicking game is like wicked good. Kicks everywhere, a lot of creativity. You mentioned his great wrestling. I mean, his last fight against Nate Maness, he hit one of the sweetest body lock inside trip takedowns like I've ever seen in MMA. It was incredible. Fantastic entries, great smothering top control. I love that he's not only as a wrestler, but he's so good with his grappling. He cuts right through guard, really good ground and pound. He has a submission threat. I mean, and we talked about how tricky a guy like Brian Kelleher is. He made Brian Kelleher look like a bum on the ground. He has 7 submission wins, and he's what, 26? So he's probably starting to enter his prime. He might not even be in his prime yet. That's what's scary. Barcelos looked really good against Trevin Jones. I'll say that. He's a technically sound fighter. He was really showed that he was beating Jones to the point of contact, which was something I was worried that he can't do anymore. I thought his athleticism was fading a little bit, but he looked good. He can be a little gun shy at times. It was much better his last fight against Trevin Jones. But but in the past, he's fought at a snail's pace, and that worries me. He is a counter striker. His counter right is his best blow. He also has a good kicking game, good calf kicks. Probably his best avenue of victory is if it stays on the feet. He can kind of use that wide base of Nurmagomedov and kind of take it out with the calf kicks. Doesn't really check leg kicks himself, which is an issue. He's an underrated offensive wrestler. Like he can wrestle a little bit, not to the level of Nurmagomedov. Good takedown defense himself. If he's heads up on top, he's got some good strong. He's good on the ground. He's good top control, good ground and pound, really slick back takes, slick ground and pound. I think about when he out grappled Said Nurmagomedov, which was a really good win at the time. He kind of showed where he stands on the ground. He is a submission threat, but I am still a little worried about his cardio. He's getting a little older. He had recent times where he hasn't looked good. Barcelos is a really tough test for anybody, but I think Nurmagomedov is special. I think he lands hard kicks on the feet. I think he lands some takedowns. I think he smothers Barcelos on top. We see this exactly the same. I think Nurmagomedov wins, and it really just one of those continued wow, how good can this guy be? He just dominated a really good fighter, Barcelos.
Outstanding. Next up on the UFC Fight Night 217 main card is a women's bantamweight matchup between Ketlen Vieira and Raquel Pennington. Vieira, the 31-year-old Brazilian, is 13-2 in her career. She is 7-2 in the UFC. She is on a 2-fight win streak. Those being a unanimous decision over Miesha Tate in the headliner of UFC Fight Night 198 in November of 2021, and then this past May, a split decision over Holly Holm in the headliner of UFC Fight Night 206. In light of both of those being absolutely dreadful fights to watch, Vieira apparently has been relieved of her Fight Night headliner status and relegated to 4th from the top here, where she will take on Pennington. The 34-year-old Colorado native is 14-8 overall. She is 11-5 since joining the UFC out of the 18th season of The Ultimate Fighter. She was the most accomplished product of that season, right up until Juliana Pena won a UFC title, however briefly. But she can get that top spot back. She is on a 4-fight winning streak since her own loss to Holm back in January of 2020. She's beaten Marion Renault, Pani Kianzad, Macy Chasson, and Aspen Ladd. The most recent of those, the Ladd fight, was last April at UFC 273. So she will look to make it 5 in a row and keep herself in the title picture, or at least as the most elite of elite gatekeepers. And she is a very slight favorite to do so. Pennington, as of right now, is right around -115. Vieira -105. So, I mean, that line is close to a pick 'em now. Could swing either way. Keith, I mean, we talk sometimes about people failing their way up in MMA, or they'll lose and just kind of rise. Ketlen Vieira has managed to succeed her way down.
Yeah.
I mean, she headlined. Her last 2 fights were Fight Night headliners. She beat 2 of the most recognizable and accomplished women in the history of the division, even if the win over Holm was a bit questionable.
Sure. Not a robbery, but questionable.
But both of the fights were just miserable to watch. And it'd be one thing if she sprang from that to being on a massive Fight Night card or on a pay-per-view card, but they just kind of bumped her to just another fight on just another Fight Night card that's every bit as bad as the 2 she headlined. It feels to me a little bit like the UFC not fully cutting bait on Vieira as someone that might be able to win her way to a title shot at 135, but just she's not going to get the push anymore. I mean, she's winning questionable fights and she's blown weight once. She missed weight for the Yana Kunitskaya fight, but even in the time she's made weight, she is such a massive bantamweight that even when she toes that scale at 136, I feel as though she might have such a drastic weight cut that it affects how she fights, because that would explain part of the problem, because physically she has all the tools. She's an absolutely giant bantamweight. I think she has pretty well-rounded skills, but I mean, she suffers from output. She's not great late in fights. I mean, we've said this, at least maybe it's just me beating this drum for the last 2 years, but anytime I see someone like Ketlen Vieira, someone like Macy Chasson, Aspen Ladd, where they are clearly killing themselves to make 135, and you know that they could move up to 145, win one fight and get a title shot.
She might even have to win a fight.
Yeah, she might not have to. They might, like the UFC, you could hear Joe Rogan saying, she beat Holly Holm. She beat Miesha Tate. I mean, if you look at her resume, Holly Holm, Miesha Tate, Kat Zingano, Sarah McMahon, she's beaten like 4 of the 10 greatest bantamweights in MMA history.
Yeah. She got a much better resume than I realized.
But
she probably like
you don't remember it because the fight's so terrible.
Yeah.
So it does make me wonder. And here against Pennington, somebody who Pennington, she is a skilled fighter. You know, like if I could point to flaws in Raquel Pennington's game, she doesn't have a ton of power for as much output as she has. And she has her reputation for being tough and being able to take an incredible amount of punishment, mostly because she has defensive lapses that lead her to taking an incredible amount of punishment.
Yeah, not the compliment you want.
Yeah, like but as somebody who's like very durable and a grinder and a builder and someone who, if you let her, will just fight a 2004 Randy Couture fight, and just the entire fight will take place within 18 inches of the fence, and we'll just push you into the fence for 3 rounds and weigh on you. I think this is actually a bad matchup for Vieira. Like, give me Pennington in this one by decision. I think it'll be another ugly fight.
Yeah.
But Ketlen Vieira could hurt Pennington, but I don't think she'll hurt her bad enough to finish her. And even if Vieira wins the first round, Vieira's output is going to drop. Pennington's will stay the same or build, and Vieira will be less and less able to just get off the fence or fight off takedowns, or maybe Pennington will just start outstriking her with volume. Because if neither woman hurts the other obviously and badly, then it just looks like Pennington outstriking Vieira at a 2-1 clip for 2 rounds. That wins the fight too. So give me Pennington by decision.
Yeah, this is a weird fight, and the placement on the card is really weird. I understand because of Vieira and Pennington not being the most exciting fighters, but when you think about the rankings and the name value and who's won, I mean, there's not a person on the card who really deserves a main event more than Ketlen Vieira based on just who they beat. Like, you could argue that it should be the main event. At least it could be the co-event. Like, in rankings, if you had to pick one person fighting like for a title next, it's the winner of this fight. Like, this could be a number 1 contender matchup. It just when I first looked at
the co-main event has a fighter who's lost 4 of his last 5 fights. The main event has a fighter who's lost, I think, 5 of his last 6, or at least 4 of his last 5.
Yeah.
On merit, just maybe should be the main event.
Yeah. Now I'm glad it isn't, because I don't want 2 extra rounds of this fight. Thank God. But so shout out to whoever decided to not do that. Yeah, Pennington. She is what she is at this point. I mean, we know, like, my notes aren't changing. They're all the same. Like, she's a minus athlete who's flat-footed, kind of slow. But you mentioned she presses action. She can take a beating. I mean, she can take a beating except for the Amanda Nunes fight. She couldn't take that beating, but that's a little different.
Yeah.
The reason why she takes beatings is because she presses the action. She's a builder. She gets stronger as the fight goes. I'd say she's technically sound, even though she's not a good athlete. She's a tight boxer. Gets in the pocket. And one thing she was doing this a lot of lead lefts, really weird, like lead left hooks in the last fight, which was a little surprising to me. I like that she's added that punch. I didn't like that she went to it as much as she did. She kept like dipping to the right and left hook, which kind of seemed like you could counter that. But her best bet, this fight is exactly what you said: chest to chest, grinding in the clinch. She will look to wrestle, maybe get a takedown. She's hard to take down herself. Plus, she has that like really good standing guillotine. So if Vieira goes for a takedown in the clinch and leaves her neck open, that's something Pennington can get a takedown or sorry, get a submission or get a takedown herself. When you take Pennington down, she does really well to work back to her feet quickly. She doesn't. She's one of these persons. She doesn't. She's not satisfied or content, or what's the word I'm looking for? Like, she won't concede a position. She'll continue to work back to her feet. So that always makes it a little tough. She's a submission threat, and Cardi helps her. I mean, she's one of these people. She can go hard in the clinch for 15 minutes. Like, she's got good cardio in that position. Vieira, you mentioned, big, physically strong woman. Very, besides just being big, like sturdy. She's got long arms, like really weird frame. She's a counter striker with a boxing style. Everything comes off the jab. It's really like an up jab. Tended throws from her hips. She has a little bit of a looping style, very Fedor Emelianenko style to that, where punches come, like her power punches come a little bit weirder angles. She does lack hand speed, but she has a lot of pop in her strikes. She's definitely the harder hitter of these two. She also has some defensive hold. She pulls her head straight back up, but she likes to battle the clinch too. She battered Kat Zingano in the clinch, but I was surprised how controlled she was by Holly Holm in the clinch. Again, I do think that has a lot to say about Holly Holm, who I think is historically underrated for her wrestling, her grappling. But not to go on a side note. I'd say she's a good wrestler. She's a judo black belt. I actually think that would probably be your best bet, is trying to get some takedowns herself. I mean, she threw Sarah McMahon. So, like, she has that ability. And I really think she limits herself by not going to it more. She's got some good entries. She's out grappled some good grapplers. Sarah McMahon, Sijara Eubanks, who's, good grappler. Yeah. Kat Zingano, Yana Kunitskaya. Man, this is a tough fight. It's really, I've been flip-flopping back and forth. Vieira from distance, I definitely think that favors her. She hurt Holly Holm a couple times at distance. I'm surprised. I thought Pennington was going to be the underdog. I was surprised when you said that she was a slight favorite. I would have thought like Vieira would be like negative 160 to plus 140 kind of range. I'm really interested in the clinch.
I just checked, and Pennington is still just the very slight favorite on every major book. Yeah.
No, I wasn't like doubting. Like, I didn't think your information was wrong. I was just surprised. I just, based on the wins they've had and the rankings, I just thought Vieira would be a little higher. I can see why. I mean, this is a tough stylistic matchup, and the clinch is. I wonder who's going to win that in the clinch. I don't think Pennington will have as much success in the clinch as we think. I really do think that had to say a lot about Holm. If this was a 25-minute fight, I would feel much better picking Pennington. But being that's only 15 minutes, I don't know if the fading of Vieira will have as much of an impact. So I'll go the other way. I'll take Vieira in a really close, like, split decision victory. I'd say she just lands the harder shots, and that's why she gets the victory.
Got it. Bonus question. I mean, when we think of either married couples or like long-term committed couples in MMA, most often they're kind of similar in their athlete profile. Like, you think of Tim Elliott and Gina Mazzani. They're both, like, neither of them a super athlete, just super scrappy overachiever, type fighters. Thiago Santos and Yana Kunitskaya are both like physical specimens, and both of them, at least until Thiago Santos' knees gave out, were like super athletes. Is there a bigger gap in athleticism between a couple in the UFC than Raquel Pennington and Tecia Torres? Like, Tecia Torres is one of the fastest people in the UFC.
Yeah. Is there anybody who's like a really good fighter married to like an absolute bum? Chris Cyborg and Evangelista Cyborg. I know they're not married anymore. But,
yeah. I mean, Rose Namajunas and Pat Barrett. I mean, Montana De La Rosa is still in the UFC, and Mark isn't.
Yeah. Like, Tecia Torres wins on her athleticism, and
she's one of the fastest fighters in any division. Fast.
They should have like a reality show because of how different they are.
That'd be funny. Like they should. Yeah. They totally should.
Like UFC should make like an MMA is like reality show. Well, what am I talking about? Like they haven't done that before.
Yeah. but one with a new idea.
Yeah, like just Tisha Torres and Raquel Pennington just going around doing like living life. Like my wife could watch it or something.
Next up on the UFC Vegas 67 main card is a middleweight matchup between Punahele Soriano and Roman Kopylov. Soriano, the 30-year-old Hawaiian, is 9-2 overall. He is 3-2 since joining the UFC out of the third season of Dana White's Contender Series. He won his last time out, knocked out Dalcha Lungiambula early in the second round. That was at UFC on ABC Ortega versus Rodriguez last July, and that allowed him to snap a 2-fight losing streak, the only losses of his career so far, against Nick Maximov and Brendan Allen, both of those by decision. He will look to make it 2 in a row against Kopylov. The 31-year-old Siberian from Russia, 9-2 as well as a pro. He is 1-2 since joining the UFC as the former Fight Night's global middleweight champ. He also won his last outing. That was a third-round knockout of Alessio Di Chirico in September at UFC Fight Night Gane versus Tuivasa. That got him back on track against the first 2 losses of his career, which were his first 2 UFC fights. Those were a loss to Carl Roberson all the way back in November of 2019, and then a loss in October of 2021 to Albert Duraev by decision. Odds here, Soriano, a moderate favorite, -165, and Kopylov is +140. Keith, there was once upon a time that I was pretty excited for Roman Kopylov to be in the UFC. It was actually right around the time I made the transition from mixed martial arts fan to mixed martial arts media member. You know, he, at the end of 2018, he was 8-0. He was the outgoing Fight Nights Global champ. He was 27 years old. He was a heavy-handed boxer who had apparently good takedown defense. I was like, this guy is a stud. This guy has at least title picture upside. I mean, 2018, we're talking about like, you know, the chaos years of the UFC middleweight division, like title picture, but none of that has come out. I mean, that's a little over 4 years ago that he was signed by the UFC. Since then, he has 3 fights. He's 1-2. The wins have not aged well for him. The losses have not aged well for him. He definitely has busted prospect tag all over him right now. And it's conceivable that this is his last gasp in the UFC. I mean, getting choked out by Carl Roberson has not aged well. And I mean, his win over Alessio Di Chirico, the good news about it is that it was a close competitive fight. And as Di Chirico started to gas, Kopylov started going to the body. That's the good news. That was like good tactical decision making. The bad news is that Alessio Di Chirico is not good. So it doesn't redeem that star for me. Like, I don't know where the guy who was ripping it up in 2017, like 2017 was really his year. I don't know where that guy went.
Yeah.
I don't know if USADA killed him because, yeah, obviously if performances drop off, that's one indicator. But if you also have a bunch of mysterious injuries, blown weight cuts, things that cause you to withdraw from fights, because he's had something like 5 fights canceled since he's been in the UFC, and they're basically all due to him.
It sounds like you getting a job with Sherdog just like threw off the normalcy of the world.
Apparently, I ruined it. I threw Roman Kopylov out of orbit. But like, I don't know if I just had an overinflated impression of how good he was based on the competition he was fighting, which is not normally a huge problem in Fight Nights Global. Like,
no, yeah, Fight Nights Global is great.
Like they're along. Well, M1 is gone now, but at the time it was M1 ACB. It wasn't even ACA yet, I don't think. Or like the kind of big 3 in Russia.
I still call it ACB. Still.
Well, it's gonna have a new name now because
sorry, I still call them the Supersonics, the Seattle Supersonics, and all
that. And we're gonna have to come up with a different name because I don't know if they're gonna rename. But like, ACA just bought Fight Nights Global, so it's going to be one massive thing now. Anyway, what Kopylov is now is stylistically he's the same fighter. Like he looks like a crisp boxer, but just everything's a little slower. He like UFC level fighters are bullying him. Like Carl Roberson's ground game turned out to be surprisingly good, just like his striking turned out to be surprisingly not quite as good as advertised.
180.
Yeah. But he just got ground out by Albert Duraev. Duraev just kind of pushed him around, bullied him. He was a fresher fighter at the end of the fight. And again, I just don't hang much on Alessio beating Alessio Di Chirico in September of 2022, where I think he'd already been cut and like brought back. I still believe to a certain extent in Puna Soriano. Soriano, like his buddy and fellow Ali Abdelaziz employee, Dan Ige, like they're more than just like the stereotypical just scrap Hawaiian of 2005. Like for a long time, Ige's best trade at the UFC level was his wrestling and ground and pound. But Soriano, good striker, good boxer, tons of power, and while he is prone to overswinging, he also can generate power without overswinging. So, I mean, like fighting calmly is definitely to his best advantage. And it didn't look great against Maximov, but generally Soriano, his offensive and defensive wrestling are pretty sturdy. I think Soriano like has every avenue to victory against Kopylov here. I think he's probably going to hurt Kopylov pretty bad on the feet. Kopylov just, he's a shadow of the boxer he used to be. And if Kopylov wants to bring this to the ground, I don't think he'll be able to, whereas Soriano will if he wants. And he's going to be just physically bigger and stronger. Like I don't think he'll be taller, but he's a massive guy. Give me Soriano by a pretty bruising decision. I'm not going to pick the knockout here. Like Kopylov hasn't been knocked out. He hasn't been hurt too bad on the feet, even in his losses. But Soriano's going to hurt him worse than he's been hurt. And I think even if the UFC doesn't cut him immediately, it will kind of put an end to speculation of Kopylov's upside as a UFC middleweight.
Yeah, this is an interesting matchup because, again, I think both guys has shown flashes of some really good fighters. Soriano is a guy that I've kind of, gone back and forth on him. He's a southpaw that he's pretty well rounded. Pocket boxer, quick hands, accurate. He's got some big power. I go back to that fight against Todorovic where his left hook, he couldn't miss it. His left hand, the overhand left, was also what smashed Dolce Lingbula. He mixes kicks into his combos, which I like. He's willing to eat a punch to land a shot, and that's because he has this. One, he can crack himself, but two, he has this unbelievable trust in his chin, which we haven't seen it really fail him yet. I think he's an underrated wrestler now. Like he's not Bo Nickel, but I mean, he's got good penetration step, good at driving through your hips. He showed how strong he is by just, and it seems like it's the theme with a couple of the wrestlers on this card, just picking up guys and slamming them. I also like that he'll get in the clinch and it'll look like foot sweeps, and he's got some really hard ground and pound, and he has that Hawaiian power that they have where they don't look any different, but something about Hawaiians they can really crack. Kopylov, he's a southpaw that you mentioned. Like he's a good athlete. He's big for the weight class, long and kind of lengthy kind of guy. Good footwork, moves in out of range really well. He does well when he's the one like pressing forward instead of being pressed back. When the Chirico had success was when he was actually putting the pressure on him. He has had low output at times, which is really worrisome. Even in that fight, like single strikes, he has quick hands. I give him that nice stiff jab. He throws straight punches down the pipe. Good kicks to the body, especially from the southpaw stance against an orthodox fighter. He throws a lot of high kicks. Carl Robinson had a lot of success against him with calf kicks, so that's concerning, and that's something that Soriano can do really well with those like big thudding kicks. He's a good wrestler, though I think he doesn't wrestle enough. He's got strong takedown defense when trying to get taken down. When he goes for takedowns, good penetration step. He has no submissions on his record, and he was subbed by Carl Robinson, which you mentioned has not aged well. And despite getting that third round stoppage, I agree with you, the body work, which was really nice against Jericho. He was slowing down in that fight. Like he kind of got a second win in the third round, but the second round he kind of took off. Like he won the first round, looked really good, looked sharp. Second round really faded. Then third round he kind of picked up again. So this is a tough fight to pick. I think Kovalev should wrestle. I think he should go for some takedowns. And I think he might even get some, but I think Soriano will get back to his feet. I think they'll slug it out. I think both guys can win some exchanges. I think it'll kind of be a back and forth fight. I think both guys can land some hard kicks, some good punches. I'm just going to go with the output of Soriano. I know that he will continue fighting. He won't take portions of the fight off. So give me Soriano. I'm with you. I think it's going to be a back and forth fight, but I think Soriano's going to win a decision.
The co-main event of UFC Fight Night 217 is a men's featherweight matchup between Dan Ige and Damon Jackson. Ige, the 31-year-old Hawaiian by way of Las Vegas, is 15-6 overall. He is 7-4 since joining the UFC as one of the standouts from the first season of Dana White's Contender Series. Opened up his UFC run after a debut loss to Julio Arce with 6 straight wins that brought him really to a headlining fight and the cusp of a title shot. I mean, he fought Calvin Kattar and lost. That was back in July of 2020. But the winner of that fight was within shouting distance of a featherweight title shot. But starting with that loss to Kattar, he is 1-4 since. He knocked out Gavin Tucker in just seconds back in March of 2021, then proceeded to lose 3 straight to Chan Sung Jung, Josh Emmett, and Movsar Evloev. The most recent of those, the Evloev fight, was last June at UFC Fight Night Volkov versus Rosenstrike. It was a unanimous decision. He's going to look to get back on track against Jackson. The 34-year-old Texan is 22-4-1 with one no contest in his mixed martial arts career. He is 5-2-1 with one no contest across 2 stints in the UFC, but he is 4-1 since being back, 5-1 since being back this time. He is on a 4-fight win streak since his loss to Ilia Topuria 2 years ago. He's beaten Charles Rosa, Cam Wella-Kirk, Dan Argueta, and Pat Sabatini. The most recent of those, the Sabatini fight, was a first-round smashing on the ground at UFC Fight Night Sandhagen versus Song in last September. Odds are close on this one, but Ige just the slightest of favorites. He's -125, Jackson +105 on the comeback. Keith, this is a fight between 2 guys that have reached this co-main event, reached this matchup from almost the complete opposite directions. I mean, I kind of ran down Ige's run. I mean, Ige, he won his way into the UFC from the Contender Series, and I thought he was just going to settle into being a solid action fighter, and probably win 2, lose 1, win 2, lose 1, and, rack up 20 fights in the UFC and probably a good handful of bonuses. And instead, he won 6 in a row. He made it again to that fight with Calvin Kattar, where the winner might only have been one more win away from a title shot. But since then, he's kind of regressed to the mean. And part of it is that he's gotten no breaks in booking. Like, he was booked very sensibly until he got to the Kattar fight. But Chan Sung Jung, Josh Emmett, and Movsar Evloev, those are three top 10 fighters. Well, it's one of them, Emmett, is probably going to fight for title this year. Evloev might fight for a title next year. And Jung was, Jung is a perpetual. Yeah. Ige's gotten no breaks. And because of that, it's hard for me to tell whether he's regressed in his skills, because the interesting thing on his way up was he kept on developing he was adding to his skills, just each time out, he was improving. Here, I can't tell if that has stopped or it's just stopped because all of a sudden he's facing Josh Emmett and Movsar Evloev, and he can't show how nifty his defensive wrestling is anymore. Jackson is coming at this the complete opposite way. It's not I mean, it doesn't have quite the same sizzle on it because there aren't the finishes and the highlights, but it's every bit as remarkable as Julian Erosa's most recent run in the UFC. I mean, Jackson is 5-1, and the only guy he's lost to is Ilia Topuria. Ilia Topuria might fight for a title by the end of this year. And none of his wins are sensational, but some of them aren't junk. Like, he destroyed Pat Sabatini in a minute. There's obviously a huge gap in the level of competition the two guys have been fighting. Like, Jackson can't seem to get a step up no matter how many wins in a row. Ige can't get a break no matter how many he loses. But here where they kind of meet in the middle, I think this matchup kind of favors. I don't think the matchup favors Jackson, but I favor Jackson in this matchup. Jackson, I liked both of these guys' old nicknames better. Like, Dan Ige used to be Dan Dynamite Ige. Now he's Dan 50K Ige. He's not guaranteed 50K, but he can always guarantee Dynamite. Like, Action Jackson is a terrible nickname. I'm sorry, Damon. Action Jackson is a terrible name. It's named after a terrible movie, and you're a wonderful fighter, but action is not the first thing I think of when I think of your fights. The Leech was a perfect nickname for you. Like, because yeah, he comes from a wrestling background, but he's not, he is not the Michael Chandler, Josh Koscheck, bowling ball, double leg through the man's hips type of wrestler. He's like a leech. Like, his takedown game at its best reminds me more of Ben Askren than of like Tyron Woodley. And he's just turned into like a very sticky, suffocating, tiring, persistent grappler who builds.
He's gonna wear you out. He's gonna wear you out. Yep. Like, if he's gonna name himself after a movie, it should be like 2001 Space Odyssey. Just bore you out. That's it. Damon, 2001 Space Odyssey, Jackson. And listen, don't at me saying that was this is a fucking terrible movie. Don't be a hipster.
Hey, I enjoyed that movie, and I thought that was a great line.
No, you did not.
Every time Damon Jackson wins, he should just go, "My God, it's full of stars." Like, you finally got to the end of the movie, and that's your payoff.
You're just trying to be like cool and a hipster.
Close the octagon door, Hal. Yeah. Whoa, look at that. Do not adjust your screens. We are, in fact, wearing different clothes. I got a different hat on. I need to shave even worse. Apparently what happened is Hal 9000, aka StreamYard, was so offended by Keith's recent comment that it quit on us. And then I was so personally offended that when we started again on Wednesday night, I forgot to hit record. So here we are getting back together again 3 or 4 days later to finish this preview. But as I was saying, I think Jackson's trademark game is likely to work on Ige here. And I say that in full recognition that I could be dead wrong and looking real silly in about 3 minutes, because Ige, he's going to have the hand speed advantage. He's going to have the power advantage. He has been usually a pretty fast starter in his recent UFC run. So if he catches Damon Jackson early, plunks him, I won't be shocked. But if this thing makes it to the end of the first round, which again, that's going to be my pick here, I'm going to feel better about Jackson's chances pretty quickly. Even if Jackson has trouble getting takedowns early, that's not going to make him stop. He will stick to that game plan to a fault. So if he goes 0 for 5 on his takedowns in the first round, I'm not too concerned. Like I say, I liked it when his nickname was the Leech, because he just has that sort of persistent, cling to you approach to wrestling and grappling. Give me Jackson to win a decision here. Probably going to have to navigate some rough waters in the first round, but by the middle of the second, I think his takedowns are going to start working. And give me Jackson to win this thing going away, like for Ige to be the more tired guy in the third round, and for him to be probably having Jackson on his back and Ige fending off like choke attempts and stuff for most of the third.
It's funny that you already know who I'm picking. It'd be funny if I switch it now.
Come on, Keith. I've already made the closing scroll.
I think this is one of the toughest fight on the entire card. I think it's really evenly matched. Kind of like
both guys, like going down the escalators, one up, like meeting at the perfect point where Ige's kind of taking that step down in competition compared to the killers he's going against. And then Jackson's taking that step up. So it's kind of like who's at the right spot at the right time. Ige, he hasn't looked good recently, but again, he's, as we already talked about, he's faced like murderer's row. He's a pretty well-rounded fighter. I've said this about him in the past. He reminds me a lot of Belal Muhammad. And what I mean by that is there's a limit to his talent. Like his, when you take notes on Ige or Belal Muhammad, there's nothing that really jumps out at you like, wow, this is the elite level guy. But what he does have that is elite is his like intelligence. And he'll put himself in a position, he'll see his opponent's weakness, and he'll expose that and kind of give him the best chance. More of a like, all right, I'm not gonna do it. I was gonna say like an early 2000s Patriots, but my love, my hometown. He's a pressure fighter that has really high volume. He loves to get in the pocket, unload big combinations. I love that he throws combinations. His right hand left hook combo, like a straight right left hook, is one of his go-tos. I'd say he has stinging power. He's not going to put you out one shot. I mean, he can, but I mean, generally speaking, he's not a one punch knock you out kind of guy. But he's got he'll hurt you with his power. He throws a lot of power shots too, and he really kind of whips his shots. I like that he comes, even when he's getting beat up, he comes the entire fight. Now, the thing that I'm most concerned on the feet is his chin at this point, because he's taken ungodly amount of damage. I mean, we mentioned Edson Barbosa, Calvin Kattar, the Korean Zombie, Josh Emmett, and Movsar Evloev. That's like he's taking some damage. He's got some great leg kicks. I like that. I love that he does this like flying knee to close the distance. He's a good wrestler, good reactionary double. If his opponent is a weak wrestler, he's gonna put on his wrestling shoes. He's gonna be spending a lot of time in the wrestling gym. That's kind of his thing. Nice timing, I said, on his entries. Pretty good at winning scrambles. Good grappler overall. He's more of a top side grappler. He sets up his submission with some good ground and pound, and he has BJJ black belt. Now, Damon Jackson, he's a long and lengthy fighter. Also a high volume one, so this is going to be really fun. Presses a really good pace. On the feet, he does well to kind of keep his distance with long-range striking. Really complete kicking game. That's the big part of his striking is his kicks. He has a lot of defensive hold. One, he keeps his chin high in the air. He also throws some naked leg kicks, which leaves him open to counters. You mentioned he has a wrestling background. It's actually something we've seen a lot more of recently. Is him looking for takedowns. Also a guy that if you pressure him back, he'll drop down, use your pressure to set up his takedowns. He got 6 takedowns against Charles Rosa. His last fight, Dan Argueta, he ragdolled him. The one thing, though, for a guy who's a good offensive wrestler, he's kind of a weak defensive wrestler. Mirsad Bektic took him down 7 times, and he actually makes it worse because he'll jump for a guillotine. He's not scared to go to his back and use his grappling. Now, he's got a really good guillotine, so if you make a mistake, he will put you out with it. I would say his overall grappling skills is a little underrated. He's got a slick submission game, really good back takes. You mentioned it. He likes to backpack fighters. Look at his last fight, he backpacked. Against Mirsad Bektic, he really showed his submission defense by going against a good grappler like that and not get submitted, but also he showed his cardio on 3 days' notice to actually win a fight because of his cardio. But surprisingly, in his last fight, he would slow down a little bit against Dan Argueta, which might have been because he was going so offensive wrestling, putting a, triangle in the back and all these different things. Might have burnt out his legs a little bit more than usual, and just a different style fighter. Like I said, this is a tough fight to pick. I flip-flopped a little bit. I'm going to go with Ige. I think it's because of Jackson's refusal to sprawl on a takedown, which I know Danny. I know he's going to do his homework. I could that was my tiebreaker. I think we could have some back and forth rounds, but Ige being on top. So, and then Ige also has a little bit more power on the feet. And if one person has a huge, I don't think either guy has a huge advantage somewhere, but if one guy has a big advantage in the fight, I would say, okay, then Ige really pieces him up on the feet. That's where
I think someone could have a big advantage. So give me Ige in a really back and forth fight. I'll take Ige by decision.
That brings us to the main event of UFC Fight Night 217, a middleweight clash between Nasruddin Imavov and Kelvin Gastelum. Imavov, the 27-year-old Frenchman, Russian-born Frenchman, is 12-3 overall. He's 4-1 since joining the UFC back in 2020. He won his debut against Jordan Williams, dropped a majority decision to Phil Hawes in his second UFC fight, and has rattled off 3 straight wins since then, those being a second-round knockout of Ian Heinisch, a second-round TKO of Edmund Shabazian, and most recently, last September at UFC Paris, a unanimous decision over Joaquin Buckley. He carries that 3-fight win streak into this main event against Gastelum. The 31-year-old Arizona native is 16-8 with 1 no contest overall. He's 11-8 with 1 no contest since joining the UFC as the winner of the 17th season of The Ultimate Fighter. He has bounced back and forth between welterweight plus, let's call it, and middleweight. He is 4-6 with 1 no contest at middleweight. And at middleweight, he fought his way all the way to an interim title shot against Israel Adesanya that took place at UFC 236 back in April of 2019. He lost a close decision there. It was up until that point probably the toughest fight anyone had given Israel Adesanya in the UFC, but that marked the beginning of a slide for the tough winner. Including the Adesanya fight, he is now 1-5 in his last 5 fights. Has not fought at all since August of 2021. So this will be his return to action after nearly a year and a half. And he comes in on the back of back-to-back losses to Robert Whittaker and Jared Cannonier. The most recent of those, the Cannonier loss, was at UFC on ESPN 29, again, August of 2021. Perhaps because of the differing work rate of these two gentlemen, the nearly opposite momentum with which they come to the fight, Imavov is unsurprisingly a favorite here. He's -200, Gastelum around +170 as the underdog. Keith, we talked about this in the co-main event of Ige versus Jackson just now, but here it's even more exaggerated. Imavov is, if not the hottest up-and-comer in the middleweight division, he's certainly in the same breath with like your Andre Muniz types. I mean, obviously,
yeah. I mean, there's one guy obviously hotter up and coming. That's obviously Bo Nickel, but yeah, I mean, he's got a lot of buzz. I mean, he's good. I mean, he's in a main event, so
yeah, he's in a main event. He's on a 3-fight win streak. He's a young guy. He's kind of close to being undefeated in the UFC. His fight with Hawes was competitive. I mean, I thought the right guy won the decision, but in Gastelum, you have someone who, if not for him being a former tough winner, would probably be gone by now. I mean, he's 1-5 in his last 5. But the thing with him is, much like we said about Ige, Gastelum has gotten no breaks whatsoever.
Yeah.
I mean,
we did it last time we recorded. Like, read down his last 15 fights. It's insane.
Oh, it's ridiculous. Let's go back to November of 2014. So about 8 years ago. Jake Ellenberger, which at the time was, Ellenberger was still one of the scariest knockout machines at welterweight. Tyron Woodley, Nate Marquardt, still a scary fight at that time. Neil Magny, Johnny Hendricks, like barely a year removed from his title reign.
Yeah.
Then we go up to 185, Tim Kennedy, Vitor Belfort, Chris Weidman, Michael Bisping, Jacare. Then we get to the Adesanya fight. And this is in the midst of a brutal slide. Listen to the level of competition. Israel Adesanya, Darren Till, Jack Hermanson, Ian Heinisch. There's your 1 win. You get 1 win? Okay, great. How about Robert Whittaker and Jared Cannonier?
Just 1 win in that slide, not 1 win of this entire list.
Yeah, but like 1 win in that slide, it's like, oh, well, if you're too much for Ian Heinisch, let's put you against Robert fucking Whittaker in your next fight. And you can't beat Whittaker, so let's do Jared Cannonier next. I mean,
oh, geez.
There's not a bum in the group. And in that last 6, Adesanya,
yeah,
champ, Till, top 10 fighter, Hermanson, top 10 fighter, Ian Heinisch, top 15 fighter, and then Whitaker and Cannonier both like top 3 fighters.
Yeah, can you toss this guy like a John Phillips or something? Jeez.
Well, no, but they're tossing him Nasruddin Imavov.
Yeah. Oh, shit.
It's
like who's a name that if he got matched against Gastelum, we'd all say like, all right, that's a way step down for Gastelum, but it wouldn't be like people wouldn't be shocked. Like the guy has got some name value. Like it wouldn't be like a John Phillips. It'd be like a name value guy that would make sense for
if they given him Luke Rockhold.
Yes,
like Rockhold's like one. It would have been appropriate because Rockhold was fighting one time after like 3 years, and he'd been on a brutal slide. That would have been appropriate.
He's actually hinted at maybe even actually returning. So, yeah, Rockhold versus Gas. The Gastelum's next fight should be Rockhold. There you go.
Yeah, or bring back Sam Alvey or KB Bowler.
Yeah,
that one's for you, Dev. I mean, I'm definitely going to toss this to you first. I mean, I would just give you the seed question. Would you take Bo Nickel over either of these guys on Saturday? But I mean, I already know the answer to that. I already know the answer to that question.
Oh, you mean individually? I think at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even really have like any leading questions here. Just like, give me your thoughts on this one, and maybe it's an interesting era for 185 right now. It's a whole new world because up until a month ago, the fact that Imavov had not fought Israel Adesanya yet was a huge, like, you know, little ace up his sleeve. That's irrelevant now.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me if you think Imavov wins here, and I'm guessing you think he does. And
well, you know I'm bacon down.
Well, but they haven't seen the lost segment, so you know, do you think it's realistic that he makes his way to the title picture by the end of 2023?
Yeah, I definitely do, especially with you know, the division's wide open. It would have been actually probably a quicker run if Izzy was still a champ, because Izzy was starting to find looking for new guys with Alex Bahia being the champion. Like, it opens up guys that before wouldn't have title shots, like your Robert Whitakers and stuff. One thing I want to say about Gastelum, yeah, he's on this, you know, 1-5 skid, but if you look at those, you know, 6 fights, Jack Hermanson was the only fight that he decisively lost. Like, I thought he won the Cannonier fight, and I know I'm in the minority. I think majority scored it for Cannonier, but it was an extremely close fight. Yeah. The Till fight was really boring, but it was a closer fight. He had moments against Robert Whittaker. Like, I think he clearly lost it, but like he had moments. You know, Adesanya fight was back and forth coming down to the last round. So it's hard to gauge him, because it's kind of similar to what we just talked about Dan Ige. Like, could he just be, you know, the 8th best middleweight, and he's fought the top 7 guys, you know, is something like this, you know, just, you know, when you rank the elite guys, well, someone has to be the bottom of the elite guys. Like, is that him? Maybe so. It's also tough to gauge him because he's been inactive. He's been out for a long time now. A long layoff for someone like him who's actually been pretty active. And then we also have this motivation thing where they've questioned him with him missing weight before and showing immaturity and different things.
And just for the viewers out there, the thing that makes me saddest that we lost when we lost the original recording of the segment is that when I started introducing Gastelum, Keith brought out a bag of chips and started eating it.
Oh yeah, that great joke. I couldn't. You know, the funny thing is, I was just hungry too, and I ate the same. I ate like a similar, like small, like Fritos bag of chips. I love how I like talk about like a guy missing weight, like I'm like, you know, P90X over here or something. You know? So some things I like about Gastelum. When you watch him on film, there's nothing that's like, oh wow, like he's lost a step or anything. That's not there. I mean, I always looked at him as like A- kind of guy, like a guy like, oh, he could fight for the title and have moments. I don't think he'll win a title, but you know, if he does, like, okay, that's cool, but I'm not picking it. But I like that he's been battle tested. He's been in there. He's been in 5-round fights, and he has that huge advantage over Imavov. Like, Imavov hasn't been in a big marquee fight. He hasn't been in a main event. He hasn't been in a 5-round fight, so he kind of has that thing going for him. Gastelum's a southpaw. He moves well. He's pretty athletic. He's got, even though he doesn't look like he should be athletic. If you were just guessing, lining up all the middleweights and saying like, all right, who's the worst athlete? You'd probably say Gastelum, but
it's the DC or Fedor thing.
Yeah,
surprisingly
exactly.
light on their feet.
Yeah. He's got quick hands. He tends to fight in bursts, so it's kind of like everything at once and slow it down, then everything at once. I like that he sets up his attacks with a lot of feints. He was freezing Cannonier with a lot of feints. He's got a great overhand left. He can overextend a little bit at times, which is why he gets hurt, which is surprisingly why he didn't get hurt more he got hurt a lot by Adesanya, but didn't get put out because someone like Adesanya, you make a mistake like that, he puts you out. He wasn't able to do that to Gastelum. He hits hard, but I've said this before. I'm going to continue to say this. They do exaggerate his punching power. I would say he's definitely one of the harder hitters in the division, or I should say he's like in the top half of guys who can, hit in the division. And I also think it's like based on his size, smaller guy in the division. When he does hurt somebody, like they talk about it. They like exaggerate like how good he is, and it's like, well, it's like my wife and my older daughters, they love watching America's Got Talent or American Idol or one of these, and they'll show me like, oh, look at this person singing, they're only 12 years old, and I always say, well, why'd you have to mention her age today? And I'd be like, well, because you're exaggerating like how good she is because she's 12. If it's a competition against adults, she should be graded as good as an adult would be. So, anyways, I kind of feel like that's what happens with where the hell am I going with this? I kind of think that happens with Gastelum. Like they exaggerate his punching power, but he definitely he can hit. He really steps into his shots. He makes the mistakes of overextended. I already said, and he also can be gun shy too. Like go back to like the Darren Till fight. There was moments like I think he could have won that fight if he just stepped on the gas. He has a very wide base, so he kind of has an open target. Like that's something that Darren Till had some success with. He can wrestle, but he hardly ever uses it, which is a shame because it really would make it actually probably open up his power more if he did wrestle because, guys would be dropping hands, things like that. He's got a really solid chin though. As we mentioned, Adesanya couldn't put out, Cachoeira, Robert Whittaker. I mean, these are good strikers and they couldn't put out. And he's shown that despite the look and despite the weight issues and despite, motivation, he can go hard five rounds. Like he won't slow down. Now, Imavov he's like the complete opposite of Gastelum. Like he's the guy that everything jumps off the screen when you watch this guy. I like this guy. He's well-rounded. He moves really well. That's the first thing that jumps out to me is how athletic he is. Great footwork, very elusive, really good striker, very like poised and calculated. He's a counter striker. He hangs his hands low. He kind of baits you out to attack him. But when you miss, he's a sniper. He's got some quick hands, really good snap on his shots. I love his kind of like Conor McGregor fade back. He goes from the orthodox stance, so it's like a fade back right hand. Probably similar to Gastelum in the power, where like their upper half they can hit. I go back to like the Ian Heinisch fight. He hurt Ian Heinisch. He hurt Phil Hawes at the time. But he can wrestle, and he will wrestle more than Gastelum, and he's relentless to get takedown attempts. Very good on top, hard ground and pound. Go back to like the Ian Heinisch fight, hurt him with ground and pound. Edmund Shabazian beat him up with ground and pound. He has a submission threat. I go back to like the Jordan Williams fight. We almost popped Jordan Williams' head off with a guillotine, even though he didn't get that submission. He showed really good takedown defense against Ian Heinisch. So this is it's not the sexiest main event, but I think it's fun stylistically. But I just give the edge to Imavov kind of everywhere. So I think he dominates Gastelum. I think he's bigger than him. I think he's faster than him. I think he's probably more motivated at this part. I think he's kind of, ascending up while Gastelum's, declining down. So I say he picks apart Gastelum from range with kicks, with a jab. I think he might even get a takedown or two. Give me Imavov by a pretty dominant decision.
Yeah, I wish I could bring a little like spice, a little special sauce to this main event preview and like come in hot for
American Idol.
Yeah. Come in hot for Gastelum. But even if this fight were taking place 4 months after Gastelum's last appearance, not 17, I'd feel everything you're putting down here. This isn't this is a rough matchup for Gastelum because he's facing someone who, obviously bigger, more athletic. That's just about everybody that Gastelum faces at middleweight, but a guy that just really does seem to be on the way up. It's impressive that Imavov is just 27, still refining his skills, still getting better. Here, he's going to get some 5-round fight experience that, if the UFC was not behind Imavov as a serious prospect, they'd probably put Imavov up against another up-and-coming prospect. You'd get Imavov versus, Gregory Rodriguez or Andre Muniz or something, while Adesanya and Pereira figure their stuff out. Because they're matching him up against someone in Gastelum who has name value but is on a slide, this gets 5-round experience, maybe a marquee win for him. I love that you pointed out that earlier in his UFC career, Gastelum's wrestling was a weapon. Like, he was a good takedown artist, and it opened up things for his striking. He's 1-5 in his last 5, and obviously part of the reason the one win was over Ian Heinisch is that Ian Heinisch was a borderline top 15 guy at the time, and the rest of them were much, just higher level. But also, that's one of the few times that Gastelum embraced his wrestling. Like, he got multiple takedowns. He launched him with like a belly to back, I don't want to say suplex, or the ghost of Jeff Black will come down and tell me that wasn't a suplex.
He used to say the suplex.
Yeah. But got his back standing and launched him. If Gastelum comes out and just is obviously ready to embrace that kind of game plan, I think I still favor Imavov, but I'm suddenly much more interested in this fight because I think we learned something about Imavov there. As it is, if Gastelum comes out like he has in most of his recent fights, I agree with you. Imavov picks him apart on the feet, maybe hurts him a few times, catches Gastelum overreaching with his punches. Imavov is very good at taking advantage of those little openings. Maybe he does try to take Gastelum down, but I'm not going to pick the finish here because Gastelum has proven just incredibly durable. That laundry list of just brutal opponents that we listed off the top there, nobody has finished Gastelum with strikes. Adesanya offhand is the only one I can remember knocking him down. And the people who finished him, Chris Weidman, who embraced his wrestling and heavy top game for almost the last time in his UFC career. Yeah, a big guy and a very good wrestler. And then Hermansson, who, fair play, caught Gastelum being inattentive.
shit happens.
Yeah, shit happens. Give me Imavov by a pretty dominant decision here, and just kind of grabbing his little number at the deli counter for I'm ready for, if not a title eliminator, just a 2 away from a title shot fight, and a big level up moment for Nasruddin Imavov. That is it. The 2 parts mashed into one Sherdog Radio Network preview for UFC Fight Night 217, Imavov versus Gastelum. I've been your host, Ben Duffy. He has been Keith Schillen. If this is your first time watching or listening to one of our previews, first of all, thank you. We hope you've enjoyed it. We do our best to bring the best combination of actual in-depth analysis, historical background, and occasional goofy asides that you'll find in this industry. Please do subscribe, leave us a comment. Keith and I both man the comment section. So if you've got a hot take on one of these fights, you think we're out of our minds, you have one of these, plus 400 underdogs on this card as a hot ticket, let us know. And, we'd love to hear from you. But most importantly, join us on the recap. After the main event, about 15 minutes after, we are live on the Sherdog YouTube page where Keith takes the captain's chair and we break down these fights in reverse order. We'll start with the main event, work our way all the way down to that sizzling first prelim of Priscila Cachoeira versus Sijara Eubanks. We'll talk about what was good, what was bad, what was surprising, what was controversial. There's always something. And what's next for some of the winners as well as the losers. And the live chat is wide open during that time. So we are taking your questions, your comments, and your abuse in real time. So We have a growing, vibrant community of people that come hang out with us after the fights, and we would love for you to join them. In between now and then, thank you once again for listening. Enjoy the rest of your week, and by all means, enjoy the fights.